This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I still can't sleep without checking my locks 3 times. It's been 8 months since my research opportunity of a lifetime turned into the most terrifying experience of my life, and I'm only now able to type this out. I promised myself I would share what happened once the legal proceedings were complete. They finished last week, so here goes. I was in my final year of my marine biology degree when my advisor recommended me for a prestigious research position with Dr. James Carlson. If you're in the field, you know the name. His work on cetacean communication patterns was groundbreaking, and his research facility on Blackwater Island was considered the dream destination for any serious student. When I got the email confirming my 3-month position, I literally screamed in the middle of the library. The island was about 40 miles off the Gulf Coast, accessible only by boat or helicopter. I took a research vessel from the mainland on a Tuesday morning in February. The journey took about 3 hours, and I remember feeling this mix of excitement and nervousness as the island came into view. It was smaller than I expected, maybe 2 square miles, with a dense forest interior and rocky shores. The research station sat on the eastern side, a collection of modern-looking buildings perched on a cliff overlooking the ocean. Dr. Carlson met me at the dock. He was tall and lean, probably in his mid-50s, with this intense gaze that made me feel like he was assessing everything about me. His handshake was firm but brief. "Alex, welcome to Blackwater. I hope the journey wasn't too rough?" His tone was professional but warm enough. I remember thinking his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. He gave me a quick tour of the facility, the main lab, observation deck, communication center, and my living quarters, which were surprisingly comfortable. 4 other researchers were supposed to be there, but Dr. Carlson explained they'd been called away for a conference and wouldn't return for 2 weeks. It struck me as odd timing, but I figured it was a good opportunity to make an impression without competing for attention. The first few days were amazing. I helped collect water samples, observed a pod of dolphins that frequented the eastern cove, and documented shark migration patterns. Dr. Carlson was brilliant, explaining complex concepts in ways that made perfect sense. He seemed pleased with my work, though he maintained a certain distance that I attributed to professional boundaries. On my 5th night, I was organizing data in the main lab when I noticed something strange. Dr. Carlson had been working at a computer station across the room, and when he stepped out to take a call, I glanced at his screen. There were images of marine specimens I didn't recognize, organisms with anatomical features that didn't match anything I'd studied. When he returned, he quickly closed the files and suggested I get some rest. That's when I first noticed the locked room. It was at the end of the north corridor, past the main lab. A heavy steel door with a keypad and a small window that had been blacked out. When I asked about it casually over breakfast the next morning, Dr. Carlson waved his hand dismissively. "Just storage for sensitive equipment. Nothing interesting." But something in his tone made the hairs on my neck stand up. I started noticing other things. Dr. Carlson would disappear for hours, claiming to be doing solo observations, but returning without any new data. Supplies would arrive by boat, and he'd insist on unloading them himself. Twice I saw him carrying what looked like medical equipment toward that locked room. And sometimes, late at night, I'd hear mechanical humming coming from that direction. About 2 weeks in, I woke up around 2 a.m. to a sound I couldn't immediately identify, a sort of muffled crying. Not human exactly, but definitely distressed. I followed the sound to the north corridor, where it stopped abruptly. Standing outside that locked door, I heard Dr. Carlson's voice, speaking softly but intensely, though I couldn't make out the words. Then silence. The next morning, Dr. Carlson informed me he needed to make an overnight trip to the mainland for supplies. It was the first time he'd left me alone on the island. "The weather's perfect. Just continue the observation logs. I'll be back tomorrow evening." He seemed distracted, checking his watch repeatedly before boarding the small boat he kept at the dock. As soon as his boat disappeared from view, I felt a weird mix of relief and dread. I spent the morning doing legitimate research work, trying to convince myself I was imagining things. But by afternoon, I couldn't resist investigating. I went to Dr. Carlson's office, knowing it was wrong but unable to shake the feeling that something seriously unethical was happening. His office door was locked, but I remembered seeing him use a key hidden behind a loose section of baseboard near the door. It was still there. Inside, everything was meticulously organized: journals, research papers, equipment catalogs. His desk drawers were locked, but one file cabinet wasn't. Inside, I found folders of research notes that made my stomach turn. Detailed surgical procedures performed on marine specimens, many with notes indicating failed adaptation or rejected implant. The terminology was clinical, but the implications were horrifying. In the bottom drawer, I found a ring of keys labeled with numbers. One caught my eye. It was marked NL, which I guessed might stand for North Lab. I took it, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I waited until evening, constantly checking the horizon for any sign of an early return. Around 8 p.m., I decided it was now or never. The key fit the secondary lock on the north room door. There was still a keypad, but the key overrode it, and I pushed it open slowly, fumbling for a light switch. What I saw will haunt me for the rest of my life. The room was essentially a surgical lab, but unlike anything I'd studied in school. 6 large tanks lined the walls, filled with murky water. In the first tanks were what appeared to be normal marine specimens: a young dolphin, a large grouper, a small reef shark. But the others contained things I couldn't even classify. Creatures with misshapen bodies, some with obvious surgical modifications. One had what looked like mechanical implants protruding from its dorsal area. Another had an elongated skull with multiple eyes. They were alive but clearly suffering, moving sluggishly in their confined spaces. A central table held surgical instruments, still stained with what could only be blood. Nearby, a computer displayed what looked like genetic sequences. I recognized enough to understand I was looking at genetic splicing attempts. Dr. Carlson wasn't just studying marine life. He was trying to modify it, create hybrids, incorporate technology into living tissue. I took pictures with my phone, documenting everything, fighting the urge to vomit. The creatures in the tanks seemed to watch me, and one, a dolphin-like animal with grotesque modifications to its head, pressed against the glass when I approached. Its eye followed me with an intelligence that seemed to be pleading for help. I was so absorbed in my horror that I almost missed the sound of a boat engine. Looking out the window, I saw lights approaching the dock. Dr. Carlson was returning early. I quickly shut everything down, locked the door, and returned the key to his office, my hands shaking so badly I dropped it twice. I made it back to my quarters just as I heard the main door open. I pretended to be asleep when Dr. Carlson checked on me, my heart racing so fast I thought it might explode. Through barely open eyes, I saw him standing in my doorway, watching me for what felt like an eternity before closing the door. I didn't sleep at all. My mind raced through options. There was no way to call for help. The satellite phone and radio were in the communications room, which Dr. Carlson always locked at night. The next supply boat wasn't due for a week. I was trapped on an island with a man conducting monstrous experiments, and I had just discovered his secret. Morning came, and I tried to act normal at breakfast. Dr. Carlson seemed unusually cheerful, asking about my previous day's observations with apparent interest. I gave vague answers, avoiding his eyes. As I was leaving the table, he said something that made my blood freeze. "You know, Alex, I've always valued curiosity in my students, but sometimes curiosity leads to complications." I mumbled something and hurried outside, pretending to check equipment on the observation deck. From there, I saw Dr. Carlson heading toward the dock, then veering off toward a path that led to the other side of the island. I used the opportunity to go back to my room and pack essentials into a small backpack. My phone, some energy bars, a water bottle, a flashlight. The day dragged on, each minute stretching like an hour. Dr. Carlson returned mid-afternoon and worked in the main lab. I pretended to analyze water samples, but my mind was racing, trying to formulate a plan. The island had a small emergency helicopter pad on the southern point with a storage shed containing flares and basic emergency equipment. If I could somehow send a distress signal. Around sunset, Dr. Carlson announced he was going to do some night observation and would be out for a few hours. I nodded, trying to look disappointed that I couldn't join him. As soon as he left, I grabbed my backpack and started toward the helicopter pad. I had only made it halfway across the compound when I realized I was being watched. Dr. Carlson stood at the edge of the forest path, his silhouette barely visible in the growing darkness. He hadn't left at all. He'd been waiting to see what I would do. I froze, then pretended I was just getting some air, turning toward the observation deck instead. I could feel his eyes on my back the entire way. That night, I barricaded my door with a chair. Around midnight, I heard footsteps in the corridor, then the soft sound of someone trying my door handle. The chair held, the footsteps retreated, and I sat there in the dark, clutching my phone, which was useless without signal, tears streaming down my face. Morning brought a knock on my door. Dr. Carlson's voice called out, sounding concerned. "Alex, are you feeling all right? You missed breakfast." I removed the chair and opened the door, forcing a smile. "Sorry, just needed extra sleep. I'll be right out." He nodded, but as I tried to step past him, his hand shot out and gripped my arm. His fingers dug into my skin with surprising strength. "You know too much. You're not leaving this island." His voice was quiet but ice cold. His eyes weren't those of the respected scientist anymore. They were dead, calculating, terrifying. I yanked my arm away and ran, not caring anymore about pretending. I heard him behind me, but didn't look back. I made it to the communications room, which was thankfully unlocked during the day, and locked the door behind me. Through the window, I saw Dr. Carlson walking calmly toward the building, a tranquilizer gun in his hand, the kind we used for tagging larger marine specimens. My hands shook as I tried to operate the radio. I found the emergency frequency and called for help, giving the island's coordinates and saying there was a medical emergency. I didn't know if anyone heard me, but it was my only hope. Dr. Carlson began pounding on the door. "Alex, you're overreacting. Let's talk about this like reasonable people. What you saw, it's revolutionary research. You could be part of it." The door shuddered under his assault. I needed to buy time. I remembered the emergency flares in the shed by the helipad. If I could reach it and set one off, it might be visible from passing ships or aircraft. But to do that, I needed to get past Dr. Carlson, the window. It was small, but I thought I could fit through it. I opened it quietly while Dr. Carlson continued his barrage on the door. Taking a deep breath, I squeezed through and dropped to the ground, then ran as fast as I could toward the helipad on the south side. I heard him shout behind me, then the sound of a door bursting open. I didn't look back, just kept running, my lungs burning. The path to the helipad cut through a dense section of forest, and I darted between trees, hoping to lose him. The shed was padlocked, but I smashed the lock with a rock, desperation giving me strength I didn't know I had. Inside, I found the flare gun and loaded it with fumbling fingers. I stepped outside, aimed at the sky, and fired. The red flare arced high, illuminating the island in an eerie crimson glow. I heard crashing through the underbrush. Dr. Carlson was getting closer. I grabbed 2 more flares and ran toward the rocky shoreline. If I could find a hiding place among the rocks until help arrived. I'd barely made it 50 yards when something hit me in the shoulder. A tranquilizer dart. I pulled it out immediately, but I could already feel the effects, my limbs becoming heavy. I stumbled forward, determined to stay conscious, firing another flare as I went. The world started to blur around the edges as I reached the rocks. I wedged myself into a narrow space between 2 boulders, trying to stay awake. I could hear Dr. Carlson calling my name, his voice echoing strangely in my drugged state. "It didn't have to be this way, Alex. You could have been part of something extraordinary." I must have passed out because the next thing I remember is the sound of helicopter blades cutting through the air, voices shouting, flashlight beams sweeping the rocks. I called out weakly, and hands pulled me from my hiding place, Coast Guard uniforms, questions I couldn't focus enough to answer. They found Dr. Carlson trying to destroy evidence in the North Lab, the creatures in the tanks, the computers, everything, but he hadn't had enough time. My phone with the photos was still in my backpack. The creatures still alive were evidence of his crimes. It turns out the Coast Guard had received my radio distress call and dispatched a helicopter. The flares helped them pinpoint our location in the darkness. And Dr. Carlson, he hadn't been as careful as he thought. There had already been suspicions about his research methods, but no one had been able to prove anything until now. I spent 2 days in a hospital on the mainland, being treated for the tranquilizer effects and giving statements to authorities. The investigation revealed Dr. Carlson had been conducting these experiments for years, using his reputation as a shield. The conferences that sent the other researchers away were fabricated. He'd never intended to have anyone else on the island while I was there. I was supposed to be his next assistant, someone he could groom to help with his work if I proved trustworthy. If not, well, isolated islands are good places for people to have accidents. I'm still in marine biology, but I can't look at the ocean the same way anymore. Sometimes I dream about those creatures in the tanks, especially that dolphin-like one that seemed to be asking for help. They were euthanized humanely, I was told. Dr. Carlson is awaiting trial on numerous charges. But the worst part? That look in his eyes when he grabbed my arm and said I wasn't leaving. There wasn't any madness there, no wild-eyed insanity you could point to and say, "That's a crazy person." It was cold, rational determination. He believed completely in what he was doing, regardless of the suffering he caused. I check the news every day for updates on his case. I've installed extra locks on my apartment door, and I've declined 3 research opportunities because they involved remote locations. My professors say I'm throwing away my career because of one bad experience, but they didn't see what I saw. They didn't feel what it's like to realize you're trapped with a monster who looks completely normal until the moment they decide you're in their way. I've been sitting on this experience for months now, unsure if I should even share it. But I can't sleep properly anymore, and maybe writing it out will help me process what happened. I still check my rearview mirror more than I need to. It was about 4 months ago. I was driving my beat-up 2008 Honda Civic across Arizona, heading to visit my sister in New Mexico. I like taking the scenic routes rather than major highways. You see more of the country that way. I'd been on the road for about 6 hours that day, nothing but desert and the occasional gas station to break up the monotony. The sun was starting to dip lower in the sky, not quite sunset yet, but getting there. The road stretched out ahead of me, empty in both directions. My AC was struggling against the heat, and I had the windows cracked to get some airflow. That's when I spotted him. At first, he was just a silhouette on the horizon. As I got closer, I could make out a man with his thumb out, a hitchhiker. Normally, I don't stop for hitchhikers. My dad drilled that into my head since I was a teenager. But something about this guy made me slow down. Maybe it was the desperate look on his face, or how he seemed to be swaying slightly from heat exhaustion. He looked like he'd been out there for hours. I pulled over about 20 feet ahead of him and watched in my rear view as he jogged up to my car. He was maybe in his early 30s, with a few days' worth of stubble and wearing a faded t-shirt that was soaked with sweat. He had a small backpack slung over one shoulder. When I rolled down my window, the first thing he said was, "Thank you. Jesus, thank you for stopping." His voice was raspy, like he hadn't had water in a while. I asked where he was headed, and he just said, "East, as far east as you're going." He kept glancing back over his shoulder at the empty road behind us. Against my better judgment, I told him to get in. He practically dove into the passenger seat and immediately asked if we could get moving. I remember thinking his behavior was odd, but I chalked it up to heat exhaustion. Plus, he seemed genuinely grateful. "I'm Riley," I said, extending my hand. He hesitated for a second before shaking it. "Jake," he replied. His palm was calloused and dry. For the first hour, we barely spoke. I tried making conversation a few times, asking basic questions like where he was from, but he gave one-word answers or just nodded. He kept checking the side mirror and looking behind us. Every time I noticed him doing it, my stomach knotted a little tighter. The sun was setting now, painting the desert in oranges and reds. In any other circumstance, I would have found it beautiful. Instead, the growing darkness just made me increasingly aware of how alone we were out there. Finally, after what felt like forever, Jake spoke up. "I should probably tell you why I'm out here," he said, eyes still fixed on the side mirror. "You don't have to—" I started, but he cut me off. "I'm in trouble, bad trouble." He ran a hand through his hair. "There are people looking for me, dangerous people." My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter. "Great, just great." "What kind of trouble?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Jake sighed. "I used to run with a gang out of Phoenix. Nothing major at first, just moving product, keeping watch. But I saw something I shouldn't have about 3 days ago. A murder." His voice cracked slightly. "The boss, he's paranoid as hell, thinks I'll talk. I've been running ever since." My heart was pounding now. I was alone in my car with someone being hunted by killers. Part of me wanted to pull over and tell him to get out, but another part knew I couldn't just leave him in the middle of nowhere. And what if he was dangerous himself? "Are they looking for you?" I asked. Jake nodded. "They've got people everywhere. They'll have noticed I'm gone by now." I checked my gas gauge. Half a tank. We could make it to the next town without stopping if we needed to. "How far are you going?" Jake asked after a while. Albuquerque. My sister lives there. He nodded. I can get help in Gallup. I know people there. The next few hours were tense. I kept the radio off, and we drove in silence as the desert got darker around us. My eyes were getting tired, and I knew I needed to stop soon. According to my GPS, there was a rest area coming up in about 15 miles. We need to stop, I said, just for a bit. I need to stretch my legs and maybe grab a quick nap. Then we can keep going. Jake didn't look happy, but he nodded. Just for a little while. The rest area was deserted when we pulled in around 11 p.m. Just a small parking lot, some picnic tables, and a building with bathrooms. The only light came from a single flickering lamp post and my headlights. I parked facing the exit, a habit from my late-night gas station stops. I'm going to use the bathroom, I told Jake, turning off the engine but leaving the keys in my pocket. You want anything from the vending machine? He shook his head. I'll stay with the car. The bathroom was about what you'd expect for a desert rest stop, grimy and smelling of disinfectant. I splashed some water on my face and looked at myself in the scratched-up mirror. What the hell was I doing? I'd picked up a stranger running from a gang and was now alone with him in the middle of nowhere. My phone showed no service bars. If something happened, no one would find me for days. When I got back to the car, Jake was standing outside, his body tense. He was staring off into the darkness towards the road. We need to go, he said. Now. What? Why? I looked around but couldn't see anything. I just need like 20 minutes to rest my eyes. Listen, he hissed. And then I heard it. The low rumble of engines in the distance, growing louder. Get in, I said, fumbling with my keys. But Jake grabbed my arm. No, they'll see the car. We need to hide. Before I could argue, he was pulling me towards the small maintenance building at the edge of the rest area. It was dark and looked abandoned, the door hanging off its hinges. We ducked inside just as the first pair of headlights swung into the rest area. The building was some kind of old service station, filled with dusty shelves and broken equipment. Jake found a spot behind a counter, and we crouched down, breathing hard. Through a crack in the wall, I could see outside. 3 pickup trucks had pulled in, their headlights cutting through the darkness. Men were getting out. I counted 6 of them. They all carried something in their hands. Even from a distance, I could tell they were guns. Jake, one of them called out. We know you're here somewhere. Your girlfriend told us you were heading east. Jake cursed under his breath. She didn't know anything, he whispered to me. They must have hurt her. My whole body was shaking. This was real. These people were actually hunting him. This is the only rest stop for 50 miles, another man shouted. You gotta be here. They started searching the area, flashlights sweeping across the parking lot. 2 of them headed towards the bathroom building, while the others checked around the picnic tables and trash cans. When they go to the other side, Jake whispered, we make a run for your car. Keys ready? I nodded, clutching my keys so hard they dug into my palm. Minutes passed like hours as we watched them search. Finally, most of the men moved to the far end of the rest area, searching a small hiking trail that led into the desert. Now, Jake said, and we were moving. We stayed low, running in a crouch towards my car. The parking lot felt massive, every step exposed. We were maybe 15 feet from my car when someone shouted, There, by the Honda! My blood turned to ice as a flashlight beam caught us. Then came the sound I'll never forget, the sharp crack of gunfire. Jake shoved me forward. Go! I don't remember getting in the car. I just remember the engine roaring to life and my foot slamming on the gas. The back window exploded as we pulled away, glass raining down on the back seat. Jake was yelling something. but all I could focus on was the road ahead and the headlights in my rearview mirror. "Left here!" Jake shouted as we approached a fork in the road. I yanked the wheel, and we fishtailed onto a narrower road. They know these main roads. We need to get on the back routes. The next hour was the most terrifying of my life. We tore through the desert on roads that barely deserve the name. Dirt paths, dry creek beds, anything that would keep us moving east while staying off the main highway. Jake knew the area better than I thought possible, directing me through a maze of turns and unmarked junctions. The trucks stayed behind us, sometimes closing in, sometimes falling back when the terrain got too rough for their larger vehicles. Every time I thought we'd lost them, their headlights would appear again in the distance. "There," Jake pointed to what looked like nothing but rocks and scrub. "Turn there." "There's no road," I protested. "Trust me." I turned, and we bumped onto what must have been an old mining trail, barely wide enough for my car. Rocks scraped the undercarriage as we climbed higher into a series of small hills. After about half a mile, Jake told me to stop and kill the lights. We sat there in complete darkness, listening. The sound of engines grew louder, then paused at the turnoff we'd taken. I held my breath, certain they would follow. But after what seemed like an eternity, the engines revved and faded as they continued down the main dirt road. "They can't bring those trucks up here," Jake said, his voice shaking with relief. "Path gets too narrow about a quarter-mile in. They know that." I leaned my head against the steering wheel, suddenly aware of how hard my heart was pounding. "Those people just shot at us," I said, stating the obvious because I couldn't process what had happened. "I'm sorry," Jake said quietly. "I'm so sorry you got involved in this." We stayed there until dawn, neither of us sleeping. I kept the keys in the ignition, ready to move if we heard engines again. Jake told me a little more about the gang. They were involved in drug trafficking between Mexico and the U.S., using the remote desert routes to move product. He'd been with them for 2 years, getting deeper and deeper until he couldn't get out. Then he witnessed the boss killing a rival, and he knew he was next if he stayed. As the sky began to lighten, we cautiously made our way back to a main road. My car was a mess, the back window gone, dents and scratches everywhere from our off-road escape. We drove in tense silence until we reached the outskirts of a small town just after 7 a.m. "This is good," Jake said as we approached the town. "I know people here. They can help me disappear for real." I pulled over at a gas station on the edge of town. Part of me was relieved to be getting rid of him, but another part worried about what would happen to him. "What will you do?" I asked. He shrugged. "Head further east, maybe north. Change my name. Start over." He opened the door but paused before getting out. "Thank you. You saved my life back there." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "Listen," he said, his voice serious. "If anyone asks about me, you never saw me, for your own safety. These guys don't forget, and they don't forgive." And then he was gone, walking quickly toward the town center, soon lost in the morning crowd of workers and shoppers. I sat there for a long time, hands still gripping the steering wheel. Eventually, I filled up my tank and continued on my journey to Albuquerque, driving well over the speed limit the whole way. I kept checking my mirrors, convinced I'd see those trucks again. I never told my sister what happened. I made up a story about hitting a rock that broke my back window. I stayed with her for 2 weeks instead of the planned 3 days, too nervous to drive back alone. I've been home for months now, and I still jump at unexpected noises. I've changed my routes to work, varied my routines. Sometimes I think I see Jake in a crowd, or one of those men from the trucks in a passing car. The desert doesn't seem peaceful to me anymore. Now I know what can hide in all that empty space. What can find you when you think you're alone? I don't know what happened to Jake. I don't know if he got away for good or if they found him eventually. Sometimes I check the news for stories about bodies found in the desert, but there's never anything that seems connected. I still have nightmares about those headlights in my rearview mirror getting closer and closer, about the sound of bullets hitting my car. In my dreams, we don't get away. In my dreams, I'm still out there in the dark, running. I'm not usually one to share personal stuff online, but after what happened to me last summer, I need to get this off my chest. Maybe it'll help someone else stay safe. It was mid-July, and I was on a solo road trip through the Southwest. My plan was to drive from New Mexico to California, taking my time to explore the desert landscapes and small towns along the way. I'd been on the road for about 10 hours that day, pushing through Arizona on I-40. The sun was setting, painting the desert in these incredible oranges and reds, but I was way too exhausted to appreciate it. My eyes were getting heavy, and I knew I needed to stop soon. I hadn't planned where to stay that night. That was part of the adventure, just driving until I felt like stopping. Around 9 p.m., I spotted a sign for the Desert Palms Motel about a mile ahead. Nothing fancy, just one of those old-school roadside motels with doors facing the parking lot. The kind of place that probably hadn't changed since the 70s. The parking lot was nearly empty when I pulled in, just 3 other cars. The neon vacancy sign buzzed and flickered, and the whole place had this eerie quietness that made me hesitate for a second. But I was dead tired, and the next town was at least 40 miles away, according to my GPS. I grabbed my overnight bag and walked to the office. A bell jingled when I opened the door. The lobby was small with wood-paneled walls, yellowed travel brochures, and this musty smell like old cigarettes mixed with cheap air freshener. Nobody was at the desk, so I rang the service bell. This guy appeared almost immediately from a back room, startling me. He was probably in his 50s, thin with thinning gray hair and these intense eyes that seemed to be studying me too carefully. He introduced himself as Sam, the manager. "Welcome to Desert Palms. You picked a great night to stop by. Not many travelers this week." His smile was too wide, too eager. "Just passing through?" I nodded, keeping it vague. "Yeah, heading west. Just need a room for tonight." While filling out the registration card, I noticed how he kept looking at my car through the window. He asked way too many questions. Where I was coming from, where I was headed, if I was meeting anyone. I made up some story about meeting friends the next day, even though I was traveling alone. "Room 14, he said, handing me an actual key with a plastic tag, not a key card. "It's one of our best rooms, nice and quiet at the end." Then he added, "I'm here all night if you need anything at all." Something about how he said it made my skin crawl. The room was at the far end of the L-shaped building, away from the office and the few other occupied rooms. Great, I thought. The last place anyone would hear me if something happened. I'm not normally paranoid, but something felt off about this place. The room itself was what you'd expect. Dated furniture, a sagging queen bed with a floral bedspread that had seen better days, faded carpet, and a bathroom with those tiny soap bars. Nothing special, but it looked clean enough. First thing I did was check the locks. The door had a regular lock, a deadbolt, and one of those flimsy chain locks. The window had a lock too, but it seemed loose. I pushed the desk chair under the doorknob for extra measure. Call me crazy, but Sam had seriously creeped me out. I was too tired to worry anymore, so I took a quick shower and got ready for bed. I kept the bathroom light on and the door cracked, something I always do in unfamiliar places. I tried watching TV to unwind, but the reception was terrible, just fuzzy channels with static. Eventually, I turned it off and tried to sleep. I must have dozed off because I woke up suddenly to the sound of a vehicle outside. My phone said it was 12:17 a.m. I lay still, listening. Voices murmured outside, then car doors slammed. Curiosity got the better of me. I slipped out of bed and carefully peeked through a gap in the curtains. A white van was parked right outside my room, its interior light on. Sam was there, talking with another guy, taller, heavier built, wearing a baseball cap. They were looking at something in the back of the van, but I couldn't see what. Sam seemed agitated, gesturing with his hands while the other guy kept shaking his head. Then Sam pointed toward my room, and my heart dropped into my stomach. The other guy nodded and went to the office while Sam stayed by the van. I backed away from the window, trying to stay calm. Maybe they were just doing some late-night maintenance or delivery, but at midnight? And why point at my room? I decided to stay awake and keep watch. I grabbed my phone and made sure it was charged, keeping it close. About 20 minutes later, there was a knock at my door. I froze. "Hello? Just checking if everything's all right in there." It was Sam's voice, sounding overly cheerful for the middle of the night. I didn't respond at first, hoping he'd think I was asleep and go away. He knocked again, louder. "Sorry to disturb you so late. We've had some complaints about the water pressure. Need to check if your room is affected." My heart was pounding so hard, I was sure he could hear it through the door. "I'm fine," I called out. "No problems here." "Won't take but a minute," he insisted. "Management policy. Need to check all the rooms." "I'm actually not dressed," I lied. "And I was sleeping. Can you check in the morning?" He was quiet for a moment. "Of course, sorry to disturb you. Sleep well." His footsteps moved away, but I didn't relax. Something was very wrong here. I waited about 5 minutes, then started gathering my things as quietly as possible. I wasn't staying another minute in this place. I'd sleep in my car at a rest stop if I had to. Just as I was stuffing clothes into my bag, I heard a scratching sound at the window. I froze. The curtain was still drawn, but the scratching continued, followed by the unmistakable sound of someone trying to jimmy the window lock. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial 911. When the operator answered, I whispered that someone was breaking into my motel room. I gave the name and location of the motel, my room number, and explained that I thought the manager was involved. The operator told me to stay on the line and find a safe place to hide. I grabbed my phone and car keys, then slid under the bed, pressing myself against the wall. The space was tight and dusty, making me want to sneeze, but I covered my mouth and nose with my hand. I could see the bottom of the window from where I was hiding, and seconds later, it slid open. A pair of boots appeared on the carpet. Then the second man from outside, the bigger guy, climbed through. He moved cautiously around the room, opening the bathroom door. "Not here," he called in a low voice. "Check outside, maybe saw us and ran." My heart was hammering so hard I thought I might pass out. The 911 operator was still on the line, but I couldn't speak. I could only hope they were sending help. The man searched the room, opening closets, looking behind the shower curtain. He never checked under the bed. After what felt like forever, he went back to the window. "Room's empty. She must have bolted." Then he climbed back out. I stayed frozen under the bed, terrified they might come back. I could hear muffled voices outside, and then car doors. The operator whispered that officers were 2 minutes away and to stay hidden. Those 2 minutes felt like 2 hours. When I finally heard sirens in the distance, There was a sudden commotion outside. Shouts, the van's engine starting, tires squealing. The sirens got louder, and then I heard car doors slamming, more shouting, and someone yelling, "Police! Stop!" I stayed under the bed, paralyzed with fear, until there was a knock on the door and a woman's voice called out, "Police department! Anyone in there?" I crawled out, legs shaking so badly I could barely stand, and unlocked the door. 2 officers stood there, a woman and a man, both looking concerned. "Are you okay?" the female officer asked. When I nodded, she continued, "We've apprehended 2 suspects attempting to flee the premises. Can you tell us what happened?" I explained everything. Sam's strange behavior, the van, the attempted break-in. As I spoke, more police cars arrived. The officers exchanged glances when I mentioned the van. The male officer said, "You were right to call us. This motel has been on our radar for a while. We believe it's connected to a human trafficking operation." I felt sick. The female officer explained that they'd been monitoring the place, but didn't have enough evidence for a warrant yet. My 911 call had given them probable cause to move in. They took me to a local police station to give a formal statement. The detective who interviewed me explained that Sam and his partner had been targeting solo female travelers for months. They'd find vulnerable victims, break into their rooms at night, and abduct them. The van was used to transport victims to a location across the state line. In the van, they found zip ties, duct tape, sedatives, and fake IDs. There were also photos of previous guests, including one of me that Sam must have taken when I wasn't looking. The thought makes me physically ill even now. The detective told me I was incredibly lucky. If I hadn't been suspicious and called when I did, I might have become another victim. They'd been watching the motel but weren't planning to move in that night. They put me up in a hotel under police protection for the night, and I gave more statements the next day. They found evidence linking Sam and his partner to 3 missing women from the past year. I can only hope this helps bring them home. I continued my trip after that, but everything was different. I couldn't sleep properly for weeks. Every noise made me jump. I only stayed at major hotel chains with electronic key cards and security cameras. I bought a door stopper alarm and pepper spray. I text my location to friends constantly. It's been almost a year now, and I still have nightmares about that motel room, about the sound of that window sliding open. Sometimes I wake up feeling like I'm still under that bed, holding my breath, waiting to be found. I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't trusted my instincts or if those officers hadn't arrived when they did. What I do know is that danger doesn't always look dangerous. Sam seemed like a normal, maybe overly friendly motel manager. The desert palms looked like any other roadside motel. There were no obvious red flags, just small things that added up to a feeling that something wasn't right. So if you're traveling alone and something feels off, listen to that feeling. It might just save your life like it saved mine. I've been trying to piece together what happened that day for months now. Even though I'm back home and technically safe, I still wake up in cold sweats, sometimes convinced I can hear footsteps outside my bedroom window. I guess writing this out might help me process everything. Maybe someone here has gone through something similar and can tell me if the fear ever really goes away. I was working as a seasonal park ranger at Yellowstone last summer. It was my 2nd season there, and I absolutely loved it. There's something about being surrounded by all that wild beauty that just felt right to me. I'd always been an outdoorsy person, spent my childhood camping and hiking with my dad, so getting paid to be in nature was basically my dream job. My patrol area was in one of the more remote sections of the park, away from the geysers and the main tourist spots. On a typical day, I might see a handful of serious hikers, but mostly it was just me, the trees, and whatever wildlife happened to be around. I never felt scared out there. Respectful of the wilderness, sure, but not scared. If anything, the forest felt like home. That changed on August 17th. I started my shift at 2 p.m. like normal. The weather was perfect, sunny but not too hot, with just enough of a breeze to keep the mosquitoes away. I remember feeling particularly good that day. I'd spotted a fox with her kits on my morning hike before work, and it put me in a great mood. My supervisor had asked me to check on some trail markers in a really remote section, about 4 miles off the main hiking path. It wasn't unusual to do these kinds of checks, making sure markers hadn't been damaged by weather or animals. I parked my truck at the service road access point around 4 p.m. and started hiking in. Everything was totally normal for the first couple of hours. I fixed a fallen trail sign, documented some bear scat for our wildlife team, and took some water samples from a stream that had been showing elevated bacteria levels. Just routine stuff. It was starting to get dark earlier those days, not quite fall yet, but definitely heading that way. By 6:30, the light was getting that golden quality it gets right before sunset. I was making my way back toward my truck, maybe a mile and a half out, when I heard it. A gunshot, clear as day. Now, this wasn't hunting season, and this particular area was never open for hunting anyway. Yellowstone has really strict regulations about that kind of thing. My first thought was that maybe it was a ranger doing wildlife management that I hadn't been informed about, but that didn't make sense. We always coordinated those kinds of operations. I paused, trying to figure out where the sound had come from. After a minute or so, I heard voices, men's voices, coming from somewhere off to my right, down in a small valley area. They weren't being particularly quiet, which told me they probably didn't know a ranger was nearby. I should have just radioed it in right then and there. That's protocol. But for some stupid reason, I decided I needed to see what was happening first, get some details to report. Maybe it was just someone target shooting, still illegal, but less serious than other possibilities. So I moved in the direction of the voices, trying to stay quiet and keep to the cover of the trees. As I got closer, I could make out 2 men standing over something. My stomach dropped when I realized what it was, a bull elk freshly killed. The animal was still bleeding, steam rising from its body in the cooling evening air. One guy was already field dressing it while the other kept watch, rifle in hand. Poachers. And not just casual opportunists. These guys came prepared. They had proper gear, knew what they were doing. I could see their truck parked about 50 yards away, on what must have been an old logging road I wasn't familiar with. I stayed hidden behind a thick stand of pines, watching them. The guy with the rifle was tall, probably in his 40s, with a scraggly beard. The other one was shorter, stockier, wearing a red flannel jacket. They were talking and laughing like they didn't have a care in the world, like they weren't committing a federal offense in a national park. I carefully took out my phone and snapped a few photos, making sure to get their faces and the license plate on their truck. My plan was simple. Back away quietly, get to my truck, radio for law enforcement backup, and let the pros handle it. These guys were armed, and I only carried bear spray and a sidearm that I'd never actually fired outside of training. I started to back away, one careful step at a time. I'd made it about 20 feet when the worst possible thing happened. I stepped on a branch. The crack seemed as loud as a gunshot in the quiet forest. Both men immediately stopped what they were doing and looked in my direction. "Who's there?" the tall one called out, raising his rifle. I froze, hoping they might think it was just an animal. But then a slight breeze shifted the branches, and I saw the moment the shorter guy spotted my uniform. "Shit, it's a ranger!" he shouted. I didn't think twice. I turned and ran. The forest that had felt so welcoming just hours before suddenly became a maze of obstacles. Branches whipped at my face as I sprinted between trees. I could hear the men crashing through the underbrush behind me, gaining ground because they didn't have to be careful about being quiet anymore. "Stop or I'll shoot," one of them yelled. That just made me run faster. My lungs were burning, and my legs felt like they might give out at any second. I knew the way back to my truck, but it was still at least a mile away, and I wasn't sure I could outrun them for that long. I heard the crack of a rifle, and a tree trunk to my left exploded with splinters. They were shooting at me, actually shooting at me. That reality hit me like a physical blow. These men were willing to kill a park ranger rather than face poaching charges. I changed direction, cutting sharply to the right, hoping to throw them off. The terrain was working against me, though. I was heading uphill now, each step becoming harder. My radio bounced against my hip as I ran, but I couldn't stop to use it. Not yet. Another shot rang out. This time, I felt something hot slice across my upper left arm. The pain hit a second later, sharp and burning. I looked down to see my uniform sleeve turning dark with blood. I'd been shot. The bullet had grazed me, not hit me directly, but I was bleeding pretty badly. The pain made my vision swim for a second, but the adrenaline kept me moving. I could still hear them behind me, but they seemed to be falling back a little. Maybe they realized what they'd done. Actually shooting a federal employee would mean serious prison time, and were having second thoughts. Or maybe they were just getting tired. Either way, I used the opportunity to put more distance between us. After what felt like hours but was probably only 10 minutes of hard running, I finally spotted my truck through the trees. I've never been so happy to see anything in my life. I fumbled for my keys, my bloody hand slipping on them as I tried to unlock the door. The whole time, I was expecting to feel another bullet hit me from behind. I finally got the door open and practically dove inside, slamming and locking it just as I caught a glimpse of movement at the edge of the forest line about 100 yards back. I started the engine with shaking hands and grabbed my radio. "This is Ranger Casey." I managed to get out between gasps for breath. "I need immediate assistance. Poachers with firearms, shots fired, officer injured. I'm heading back to the station now." The dispatcher responded immediately, her calm voice a stark contrast to the panic in mine. She asked for my location and told me backup was on the way. I put the truck in gear and floored it, the tires spinning in the dirt before catching. As I sped away, I checked the rearview mirror and saw one of the men emerge from the trees, rifle still in hand. He didn't fire again, though. Maybe he knew it was too late. The drive back to the ranger station is mostly a blur in my memory. I remember pressing my right hand against my bleeding arm, trying to keep pressure on it while steering with my left. I remember jumping at every shadow along the road, convinced they might have somehow gotten ahead of me and set up an ambush. When I finally pulled into the station, there were already 3 ranger vehicles with emergency lights on waiting for me. My supervisor, Dave, ran up to the truck as I parked. His face went pale when he saw the blood. "Jesus Christ, Casey, you've been shot." The next few hours were chaos. The medic on duty cleaned and bandaged my arm while I gave my statement to law enforcement. It turned out the bullet had just grazed me, taking a chunk of flesh but not hitting anything serious. 12 stitches, and I was physically good to go, though they wanted me to take a few days off. Multiple teams went out to the area I'd described, but by the time they got there, the poachers were gone. They found the gut pile from the elk and some shell casings that would later be processed for evidence. They also found tire tracks from the poacher's vehicle, which matched the photos I'd taken. I spent that night at the staff housing, surrounded by my fellow rangers who took turns checking on me. Everyone was shaken by what had happened. Poaching is common enough, but poachers shooting at rangers isn't. The fact that these guys were willing to potentially kill someone rather than face a poaching charge suggested they might have been into other illegal activities too. The next day, I gave more detailed statements to both park law enforcement and the FBI, since an attack on a federal employee on federal land falls under their jurisdiction. They took the information from the photos I'd managed to get, but warned me that without clear faces, the photos were pretty shaky since I took them in a hurry. They might not be able to identify the men. Physically, I healed pretty quickly. The wound on my arm closed up well, though I'll have a scar for life. But mentally, that's been harder. I finished out my seasonal contract, but I couldn't go back to patrolling alone. My supervisor understood and partnered me with another ranger for the remaining weeks. Even then, every time I went into the forest, my heart would race. Every snapping twig made me jump. The place that had once felt like home now felt full of potential threats. The worst part is, they never caught those guys. The license plate I photographed turned out to be stolen, and while they got some DNA from the shell casings, there were no matches in any database. They're still out there somewhere. It's been 4 months since I left Yellowstone. I'm back in my hometown now, working at my dad's hardware store while I figure out what's next. I haven't been hiking or camping since it happened. I've tried a couple times, but as soon as I get on a trail and the trees close in around me, the panic starts. Last week I was bringing some trash out to the dumpster behind the store at dusk, and I heard a car backfire a couple blocks away. I ended up curled in a ball behind the dumpster, convinced I was being shot at again. My dad found me there 10 minutes later, shaking and crying. The therapist I've been seeing says I have PTSD, which honestly feels ridiculous to me. I always associated that with combat veterans or assault survivors, not someone who had a minor injury and got scared in the woods. But she says trauma is trauma, and the fear for your life is what causes the damage, not necessarily the physical harm. I don't know if I'll ever go back to being a ranger. The thought makes me sad. I really loved that job. But every time I think about those trees, those remote trails where help is miles away, I just can't imagine feeling safe there again. Sometimes I still dream I'm running through those woods, lungs burning, the sound of footsteps gaining on me. Only in my dreams, I never make it to the truck. I always wake up right as I feel the bullet hit me, for real this time. I don't know why I'm sharing all this. I guess I just needed to get it off my chest, tell someone who might understand. Has anyone else had something like this happen? Does the fear ever go away? I just want my life back. I want to be able to look at trees without seeing potential hiding places for people who want to hurt me. I want to stop being the hunted. I've been putting off writing about this for weeks now, but I need to get it off my chest. I can't sleep properly anymore. Even in my own apartment with 3 deadbolts and a security system, I still wake up at every little sound. What happened to me last month while house-sitting has completely messed me up. It was supposed to be an amazing opportunity. My college friend Meredith inherited this massive mansion in the Hamptons from her grandparents, and she usually rents it out during the summer for insane money. But she needed someone to watch the place for 2 weeks in October while she was in Europe for her honeymoon. The regular caretaker had quit unexpectedly, and she was desperate. "Jordan, please," she had begged over the phone. "It's totally secluded, right on the water. You can work remotely from there, and I'll pay you. Consider it a paid vacation." The money was good, really good, and I had been working non-stop at my marketing job for months without a break. 2 weeks alone in a beachfront mansion sounded perfect. I could catch up on my reading, take long walks, maybe even finish that side project I'd been putting off. Plus, Meredith was one of my closest friends, and she really needed the help. The mansion was about a 3-hour drive from my apartment in the city. I packed up my car that Friday morning and headed out, excited for what I thought would be a relaxing getaway. Boy, was I wrong. When I first pulled up to the house, I was blown away. The place was enormous, 3 stories of classic Hamptons architecture, with weathered gray shingles and white trim, surrounded by perfectly manicured gardens, and a private path leading down to the beach. The nearest neighbor was at least half a mile away, visible only as a rooftop through the trees. Meredith had given me a code for the lockbox to get the keys. The house was stunning inside, all hardwood floors, high ceilings, and expensive furniture. It had that weird mix of being both lived in and museum-like that wealthy family homes often have. 5 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, a chef's kitchen, formal dining room, library, and a massive living room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the ocean. Meredith had left detailed instructions about everything: the finicky heating system, which days the gardener would come by, Tuesdays, the alarm code, and emergency contacts. There was even a welcome basket with wine and snacks. I spent that first afternoon exploring the house and grounds, then settled in with a glass of wine on the back deck, watching the sunset over the water. That first night, I was hyper-aware of every sound. The house creaked and settled in a way my apartment never did. The wind whistled through the eaves, and waves crashed in the distance. But that was normal, I told myself. I wasn't used to being alone in such a big place. Before going to bed, I double-checked every door and window, making sure everything was locked tight. It's a habit I've always had, even in my own place. I chose to sleep in the master bedroom. Meredith had said it was fine, with its king-sized bed and ensuite bathroom. Despite the unfamiliar surroundings, I slept well that first night. The next morning, I made coffee and decided to take it out to the back deck. That's when I noticed the first strange thing. The back door was unlocked and slightly ajar, just an inch or so, but enough to let in the cool morning air. I was positive I had locked it the night before. I had checked it twice. I figured maybe the latch was faulty, so I made a mental note to check it more carefully that night. The day passed uneventfully. I worked a bit on my laptop, walked on the beach, and cooked myself dinner in that amazing kitchen. Again, before bed, I did my rounds of the house, checking every lock, even testing them by pushing or pulling to make sure they were secure. I was extra careful with the back door, making sure it was firmly latched before turning the deadbolt. On Sunday morning, I went down to make coffee again and found the back door unlocked and open, just like the day before. This time it was open wider, maybe 3 or 4 inches. My heart started beating faster. I knew I had locked it. I was absolutely certain. I carefully checked the door and frame for any signs of forced entry, but everything looked intact. The lock worked fine when I tested it. Maybe it was the wind, I thought, or the house settling. But even as I tried to rationalize it, a feeling of unease settled over me. Later that morning, I was grabbing a jacket from the mudroom when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There were footprints on the floor, muddy footprints that weren't mine. They were larger than my feet, and the tread pattern didn't match any of my shoes. They led from the back door into the house, but I couldn't follow them past the tile of the mudroom onto the hardwood. I stood there, staring at those footprints for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Someone had been in the house while I was sleeping. The thought made me physically ill. I immediately called Meredith, but it went straight to voicemail. Of course, she was probably still on her flight. I left a message trying not to sound as panicked as I felt, asking if maybe the gardener or someone else had a key and might have come in early. Next, I called the local police non-emergency line. The officer I spoke with was polite, but not particularly concerned. There were no signs of forced entry. Nothing was stolen, and the footprints could have been from before I arrived. He suggested I make sure to lock up carefully and call back if anything else happened. I spent the rest of the day on edge, checking and rechecking the locks, peering out windows, and jumping at every noise. I considered leaving, but I had promised Meredith I'd watch the place. And honestly, part of me thought I was overreacting. Maybe the footprints were old. Maybe the door really did have a problem with the latch. That night, I had trouble falling asleep. Every creak and groan of the house sent my heart racing. Around 2 a.m., I finally drifted off, only to be jolted awake an hour later by a distinct scratching sound. It was coming from downstairs, a repetitive scraping that couldn't be explained away as the house settling or the wind. I lay frozen in bed, ears straining in the darkness. The scratching stopped, replaced by something worse, footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps moving across the hardwood floors downstairs. This wasn't my imagination. Someone was in the house. My phone was on the nightstand beside me. With trembling hands, I grabbed it and dialed 911, keeping my voice to a whisper when the dispatcher answered. "There's someone in my house," I breathed, giving them the address. "Please hurry." The dispatcher told me to stay on the line and find a safe place to hide. I could still hear the footsteps downstairs, moving from room to room. It sounded like they were searching for something. I slipped out of bed as quietly as possible and looked around desperately for a hiding place. The master bedroom had a walk-in closet, but it seemed too obvious. I remembered there was a small closet under the stairs, filled with winter coats and rarely used items. If I could get there without being seen, it might be my best option. With my phone pressed to my ear, I crept to the bedroom door and eased it open, wincing at the slight creak. The upstairs hallway was dark except for the faint glow of a nightlight in the bathroom. I could still hear movement downstairs, now in what sounded like the kitchen. I slipped into the hallway and moved toward the stairs, my bare feet silent on the plush carpet. At the top of the staircase, I paused, listening. The sounds had stopped. My heart was hammering so hard I was sure it could be heard throughout the house. After a moment of silence, I began to slowly descend the stairs, keeping close to the wall where the steps were less likely to creak. I was halfway down when the entire house suddenly went dark. Even the nightlight in the bathroom winked out. The power had been cut. I froze, gripping the handrail, my breath caught in my throat. The dispatcher's voice in my ear sounded very far away. "Sir, are you still there? What's happening?" I couldn't answer, because at that moment I heard footsteps again at the bottom of the stairs, coming up, toward me. In a panic, I backtracked up the stairs as quietly but quickly as I could, then realized I was cornering myself. The closet under the stairs was right there, just a few steps down and to the right. It was my only option. I took a deep breath and rushed down, finding the closet door by memory and touch. I pulled it open, slipped inside among the hanging coats, and eased it shut behind me, trying desperately not to make a sound. The small space smelled of mothballs and old fabric and was pitch black. I crouched down, making myself as small as possible, and finally whispered to the dispatcher that I was hiding and the power had been cut. "Officers are 3 minutes out," she assured me. "Stay hidden and stay quiet." Those 3 minutes were the longest of my life. I sat there in the darkness, phone clutched to my ear, listening to footsteps moving methodically through the house. At one point, they passed right by the closet door. I could see a thin beam of light, a flashlight, pass under the door as someone stopped just outside. I held my breath, pressing myself against the back wall of the closet, certain that my thundering heartbeat would give me away. The footsteps moved on, heading toward the kitchen again. I heard drawers being opened and closed. They were looking for something specific. Finally, distantly, I heard sirens. The footsteps suddenly quickened, moving rapidly toward the back of the house. I heard the sound of the back door opening, then silence. The dispatcher told me to stay hidden until the officers announced themselves. A minute later, I heard a pounding on the front door and voices identifying themselves as police. Still, I didn't move until the dispatcher confirmed it was safe to come out. When I finally emerged from the closet, the house was filled with flashlight beams and uniformed officers. The power was still out. One officer helped me to a chair in the living room while others searched the house and grounds. They found evidence of forced entry at the back door, subtle tool marks on the frame that I had missed. The intruder was gone, but they had left in a hurry, dropping a large hunting knife in the backyard. The thought of what might have happened if I had confronted them makes me sick to this day. The police took my statement and searched the property thoroughly. They found where the power had been cut at the breaker box outside. One officer stayed with me while another went to check with the nearest neighbors, but no one had seen anything unusual. By dawn, the police had finished their investigation. They advised me not to stay in the house alone, and honestly, I had no intention of doing so. As soon as the sun was up, I threw some essential belongings into my bag and drove to the nearest hotel. I finally reached Meredith later that day and explained what had happened. She was horrified and insisted I not return to the house, offering to call a professional security company to watch the place until she could return. But I felt responsible. The next day, I met with a security company who installed cameras and a new alarm system throughout the property. I returned to stay one more night. I know that sounds crazy, but I felt I had to, for Meredith. The security technician showed me how everything worked, and I felt somewhat safer with the new system in place. That final night was sleepless. Every sound had me checking the security app on my phone. Nothing triggered the alarms, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I left first thing the next morning and arranged for the security company to check the property daily until Meredith returned. It's been 3 weeks now. The police never found who broke in. They think it might have been someone who knew the house was usually empty, planning to rob it, and was surprised to find me there. The methodical searching suggests they were looking for valuables, probably assuming a place like that would have jewelry or cash hidden away. But I can't stop thinking about those footprints in the mudroom, about how the back door was open 2 mornings in a row. Had they been watching me? Were they in the house even longer than I realized? The thought keeps me up at night. I've changed the locks on my apartment, installed a security system of my own, but I still find myself checking behind shower curtains and under beds before I can relax. I used to love the idea of solitude, of getting away from it all. Now the thought of being alone in an isolated house fills me with dread. I keep wondering, what if the police had been a few minutes later? What if I hadn't heard the footsteps in time? I've turned down 2 house-sitting offers since then, even though I could really use the money. Some experiences change you forever, and this was definitely one of them. Every time I close my eyes, I'm back in that closet, holding my breath, listening to those footsteps coming closer and closer. I still wake up in cold sweats sometimes, reliving that night from 3 months ago. I've been trying to process what happened, but typing this out is the first time I'm actually putting the whole experience into words. Maybe sharing it will help me move past it. I don't know. I was driving back from visiting my sister in Atlanta, heading to this cheap motel I'd booked in a small town about 30 miles from the Georgia-Alabama border. It wasn't a trip I'd planned on making, but my sister had just had her second kid and was struggling, so I took a week off work to help out. The visit itself was great, but man, I wish I'd just stayed an extra night instead of trying to drive back when I did. It was around 9:30 p.m. when the rain started. Not just a drizzle, but one of those southern downpours that turns the whole world into a wall of water. I had my wipers cranked up to full speed, but they barely made a difference. The 2-lane highway was practically deserted, just me and my headlights cutting through the darkness and rain. My GPS kept cutting in and out, and the road signs were nearly impossible to read until I was right on top of them. I remember gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white, leaning forward like those extra few inches would somehow improve visibility. The radio was playing some late-night talk show, but I had it turned down low. I needed to concentrate. I was maybe an hour from the motel, and all I could think about was getting there, taking a hot shower, and collapsing into bed. That's when I saw the hazard lights blinking through the rain. As I got closer, I could make out a dark sedan pulled onto the shoulder. A figure was standing next to it, waving their arms frantically. I slowed down, squinting through the rain-soaked windshield. It was a woman, completely drenched, her clothes sticking to her body. She looked desperate. I hesitated. Every warning I'd ever heard about stopping for strangers on dark roads flashed through my mind. But it was pouring. She was clearly in trouble. And what kind of person would I be if I just drove past? The nearest town was at least 15 miles back, and with the storm, who knew how long she'd be stuck there? I pulled over about 20 feet in front of her car and put my hazards on. I left the engine running and cracked my window just enough to hear her over the rain. "Oh, thank God," she called out, running toward my car. She was maybe mid-30s, with dark hair plastered to her face from the rain. "My car just died and I don't have any cell service out here." I asked her what happened, still not unlocking my doors. "I don't know. It just suddenly cut out," she said, hugging herself against the cold rain. "I tried to restart it, but nothing's happening. Please, can I just sit in your car for a minute to call for help? I'm freezing." I looked at her car, an older model Toyota, then back at her shivering form. The rain was coming down even harder now, thunder cracking overhead. I unlocked the passenger door. Thank you so much," she said, climbing in and immediately wrapping her arms around herself. "You're a lifesaver, seriously." Water dripped from her clothes onto my passenger seat. She fumbled with her phone, then frowned. Still no service. This storm must be messing with the towers. I offered her my phone, but she said hers had a special roadside assistance app. Could we drive a little further to find a signal? "Just a couple miles," she promised. That's when things went sideways. I heard a door open behind me, the back door on the driver's side that I know I had locked. Before I could even turn around, I felt something hard press against the back of my head. "Drive," a male voice commanded. The woman's entire demeanor changed in an instant. Gone was the desperate, grateful stranger. Her face hardened, and she pulled a knife from her pocket, pointing it at my side. "You heard him," she said coldly. "Drive, and don't try anything stupid." My stomach dropped. My hands started trembling so bad I could barely grip the steering wheel. The guy in the back seat, I couldn't see him clearly in the rearview mirror, just a shadowy figure, pressed the gun harder against my head. "I said drive," he shouted, making me flinch. I pulled back onto the road, my mind racing. They instructed me to turn off my hazards and continue down the highway. The woman grabbed my phone from the cup holder and turned it off. "Left up here," she said, as we approached an unmarked road I'd never have noticed on my own. It was barely more than a narrow strip of asphalt, no lines, no signs. I turned, trying to memorize every landmark, every turn. The rain had let up slightly, but the road was still slick. My headlights illuminated dense woods on both sides. No houses, no businesses, nothing but trees and underbrush. We drove for maybe 10 minutes, making seemingly random turns onto progressively smaller roads. "Slow down," the man ordered as we approached what looked like an old logging path. Just 2 dirt tracks separated by overgrown grass. I turned onto it, the car bouncing and sliding in the mud. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. After about half a mile down this path, the woman told me to stop. Ahead, I could see a beat-up van parked in a small clearing. 2 men stood next to it, smoking cigarettes under the minimal shelter of a large tree. One was tall and skinny, the other shorter but stocky, muscular. "Turn off the engine," the woman said. My mind went into overdrive. This was it. This was where they were going to kill me. I thought about my parents, my sister and her kids, all the things I'd never get to do. But some stubborn part of me refused to accept that this was how my story would end. The man from my back seat got out first, keeping the gun trained on me through the window. The woman got out next, walking around to my side. She opened my door and grabbed my arm, yanking me out of the car. I stumbled, nearly falling into the mud. The tall guy from the van approached, looking me over with cold eyes. "Wallet," he demanded, holding out his hand. I reached into my back pocket with shaking hands and gave him my wallet. He rifled through it, pocketing the cash, about $200, and tossing the wallet into the mud. He kept my driver's license, though. "Keys," he said next. I handed them over. The woman was going through my car now, opening the glove compartment, checking under the seats. She found my laptop bag in the trunk and tossed it to the stocky guy, who immediately started looking through it. "What do you want?" I finally managed to ask, my voice barely audible. The tall guy laughed. "We've got what we want. Your car, your cash, your stuff." He waved the gun toward the dense woods behind me. "Now we gotta deal with you." That's when I knew I had to run. They were going to take me into those woods and kill me, no doubt about it. The 4 of them were distracted for just a moment, the woman saying something to the guy from the back seat, the stocky guy still going through my laptop bag, the tall guy looking at my driver's license. I bolted, just turned and sprinted into the woods as fast as I could. I heard shouting behind me, then a gunshot that sent birds scattering from the trees overhead. I didn't look back, just ran, branches whipping across my face, my feet slipping in the mud. The rain had started up again, and I was grateful for it. It would make it harder for them to track me. I could hear them crashing through the underbrush behind me, calling to each other. "Spread out," one of them yelled. "He can't have gone far." I ran until my lungs burned, then ducked behind a massive fallen tree. I pressed myself flat against the ground, trying to control my breathing, to stop from making any noise. I could hear them moving through the woods, getting closer. A flashlight beam swept over the area just feet from where I was hiding. "Check over there." It was the woman's voice. I heard footsteps splashing through puddles, coming nearer. I held my breath. The footsteps stopped. The flashlight beam moved slowly, methodically. I could tell someone was standing just on the other side of the fallen tree. If they looked over it, they'd see me for sure. Then miraculously, I heard a shout from deeper in the woods. "I think I see him!" The footsteps near me immediately took off running toward the voice. I stayed frozen for what felt like hours, but was probably only a few minutes. Eventually, the voices grew more distant. I raised my head just enough to look around. In the darkness, I spotted a small creek about 20 feet away, swollen from the rain. An idea formed. Water wouldn't hold footprints. Moving as quietly as possible, I crawled to the creek and lowered myself in. The water was freezing and came up to my waist, but I didn't care. I started wading downstream, using the rushing water to mask any sounds I made. I kept going, fighting against the current, slipping on the rocky bottom, but never stopping. I don't know how long I followed that creek, maybe an hour, maybe more. My clothes were soaked through, my whole body numb from the cold. But I kept going, terrified that if I stopped, they'd find me. Finally, the creek widened out, and I could see what looked like a road through the trees. I climbed out of the water, my legs so weak they could barely hold me up. I stumbled toward the road, constantly looking over my shoulder. It was a paved road, but narrow and completely deserted. I had no idea where I was, which direction would lead to safety, or how far I'd have to go. I picked a direction and started walking, staying close to the tree line so I could duck back into the woods if I saw any vehicles. After walking for maybe 15 minutes, I heard a car approaching. I dove into the ditch beside the road, peering out cautiously. It was an old pickup truck, not the van or my car. I took a chance. These carjackers wouldn't be driving around in an old pickup, right? I stumbled out onto the road, waving my arms frantically. The truck slowed, then stopped. The window rolled down, revealing an older man with a gray beard. "Jesus Christ, son, what happened to you?" he asked, taking in my mud-covered, soaking wet appearance. I was shaking so hard I could barely get the words out. "Carjacked. They had guns. Please help." He reached across and pushed open the passenger door. "Get in." I collapsed into the seat, suddenly overwhelmed by everything that had happened. The man, Frank was his name, drove me straight to the nearest police station, about 20 miles away. He gave me his coat and turned the heater up full blast. He didn't push me to talk, just let me sit there, trembling and occasionally sobbing. At the police station, I gave my statement, described the carjackers, the route they'd taken as best I could remember. The officers were sympathetic, but not optimistic. That area was notorious for this kind of thing, they told me. The isolated roads, the dense woods, perfect for criminals. They took me to the hospital to get checked out. Apart from some cuts and bruises and mild hypothermia, I was physically okay. Mentally, though, that's a different story. My car was found 3 days later, stripped and abandoned in a field about 40 miles away. They never caught the people who did it. The police think they're part of a larger operation that targets travelers on that stretch of highway. I still have nightmares about that night, about the woman's face changing from desperate to predatory in an instant, about the gun pressed against my head, about running through those dark woods, certain that each breath could be my last. I don't stop for stranded motorists anymore. I call 911 instead and keep driving. Some might call it callous, but they didn't see what I saw. They don't feel what I feel every time it rains at night. I keep wondering if I should have done something differently, if I should have just driven past, if I should have fought back somehow instead of running. But then I remember the tall guy's words, "Now we gotta deal with you." And I know running was the only reason I'm alive to write this. So that's my story. A reminder that sometimes the monster isn't hiding in the shadows. Sometimes it's standing right in front of you in the pouring rain, pretending to need your help. I still can't believe I'm typing this out, but I need to share what happened to me last month. Maybe writing it down will help me process it. Maybe someone else will recognize this guy's tactics and stay safe. I don't know. I just know I can't keep replaying it in my head without going crazy. It was a Friday night, and I was driving back from a work conference in Portland. I live about 2 hours south in a small town near Eugene. The conference ran late, and by the time I left, it was already dark. To make matters worse, the rain started coming down in sheets about 20 minutes into my drive. You know how Oregon rain can be, not just droplets, but like someone's dumping buckets from the sky. I was exhausted. 3 days of networking, fake smiling, and pretending to care about sales projections had drained me. All I wanted was to get home to my apartment, take a hot shower, and collapse into bed. My GPS said the drive would take over 2 hours with the main highway traffic, and I just couldn't handle that. So when I remembered a shortcut my coworker had mentioned that could shave off maybe 30 minutes, I decided to take it. Bad decision number 1. The turnoff came up on my right, County Road 18, a narrow 2-lane road that cut through the forest. No streetlights, barely any reflectors, just my headlights pushing through the darkness and rain. The wipers were going full speed, but still couldn't keep up with the downpour. I slowed to about 40 mph, gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. About 15 minutes down this road, I realized I hadn't seen another car in either direction. The trees pressed in close on both sides, creating this tunnel effect that made me feel claustrophobic. My phone showed 1 bar of service, occasionally dropping to nothing. That's when the first flutter of anxiety hit me. What if I broke down out here? What if I got a flat tire? I was working myself into a panic when I saw the flashing lights in my rearview mirror, red and blue strobe lights cutting through the rain. A police car. My first reaction was relief. Another human being out here in this wasteland. Then immediately, worry. Was I speeding? Did I drift over the yellow line without noticing? The cruiser stayed behind me for about 30 seconds before I pulled over onto the narrow shoulder. I put the car in park and started digging through my glove compartment for my insurance and registration. The rain drummed on the roof, and my windshield was fogging up. I rolled down my window just a crack to help clear it, and waited. In my rearview mirror, I could see a figure approaching with a flashlight. I couldn't make out much, just a dark shape moving closer. When he reached my window, I looked up and my stomach instantly knotted. Something was off. The officer was wearing what looked like a police uniform, but it didn't seem right. The badge was there, the dark blue clothing, but the patches looked cheap, like they were ironed on. And there was no name tag. His face was partially shadowed by a police cap pulled low, and he had a thick mustache that somehow seemed fake. "License and registration," he said, shining the flashlight directly in my eyes. I squinted, holding up my hand to block the light. "Can you point that away from my face, please?" He lowered it slightly. "Your tail light is out. Step out of the vehicle." That's when alarm bells really started ringing. Why would I need to step out for a tail light? And I just had my car serviced the week before. Both tail lights were fine. "Are you sure?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. I just had it checked last week. I said, get out of the car. Now. His voice had this edge to it, not authoritative like a real cop, but something eager, almost excited. I glanced in my side mirror, trying to see his vehicle better. That's when I noticed there was no light bar on top of his car, just flashing lights inside the windshield, the portable kind anyone could buy online, and no markings on the side, no shield or to protect and serve. Every instinct was screaming at me to drive away, but what if I was wrong? What if he was an actual cop in an unmarked car, and I sped off? I'd be in serious trouble. Can I see your badge number? I asked, stalling. His face hardened. Last warning, get out now, or I'll add resisting to the charges. I didn't want to antagonize him, so I made the decision that nearly cost me everything. I opened my door. Bad decision number 2. As soon as I stepped out, the rain soaking me instantly, he grabbed my arm, not like a cop would, guiding someone. This was a vice grip, his fingers digging into my flesh so hard I knew I'd have bruises. Before I could react, he was dragging me toward his car. Hey, what are you doing? I tried pulling away, but he was strong, much stronger than me. Shut up, he hissed. And that's when I saw the knife in his other hand, partially concealed by his sleeve but visible enough to make my blood run cold. He shoved me toward the back of his car, not a proper police cruiser, but an old Crown Victoria painted black with those stick-on lights. I started to scream, but he pressed the knife against my ribs. Scream again and I'll gut you right here. I've never felt terror like that moment. It was like ice water replacing all the blood in my veins. My legs nearly gave out, and I think the only reason I stayed standing was his grip on my arm. He opened the back door and shoved me inside. There were no door handles on the interior. They'd been removed. The partition between the front and back seats wasn't standard police issue either. It was makeshift, bolted in with visible screws. As he slammed the door and walked around to the driver's side, I frantically looked around for a way out. The windows didn't roll down, the doors wouldn't open from the inside. I was trapped. He got in and immediately locked the doors, then turned to look at me through the partition. In the dim light of the car's interior, I could see his face clearly for the first time. He was maybe in his 40s, with those cold, empty eyes that didn't seem human. His mustache was definitely fake. I could see the adhesive gleaming at one corner. Please, I said, my voice barely a whisper. My wallet's in my purse. Take it. Take my car. Just let me go. He smiled then, and it was worse than if he'd threatened me. It was the smile of someone who was exactly where they wanted to be, doing exactly what they'd planned. We're going for a little drive, he said, turning back to the wheel. He pulled away, leaving my car on the shoulder. I realized with horror that my phone was still in the cup holder of my vehicle. My purse was with me in the back seat, but what good would that do? Wait. My purse. As he drove, taking turns onto even smaller roads, I quietly unzipped my handbag. I always carry pepper spray. After a college friend was assaulted walking home from a night class, several of us started carrying it. I'd never had to use it, but I knew exactly where it was, in the small side pocket. My fingers closed around the small canister just as the car slowed down. We'd been driving for maybe 20 minutes, deeper and deeper into the forest. The rain had let up slightly, but the night seemed darker than ever as he pulled onto what was barely a road, more like a trail. The car bounced and lurched over roots and rocks until we reached a small clearing. He stopped the car and turned off the engine. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the soft patter of rain on the roof and my own ragged breathing. "No one can hear you out here," he said conversationally, like we were discussing the weather. No one will find you either. He got out and walked around to my door. I gripped the pepper spray in my palm, finger on the trigger, and kept it hidden in the folds of my jacket. When he opened the door, I didn't move. "Get out," he ordered. "No." I don't know where I found the courage to say it. His face contorted with rage, and he reached in, grabbing me by the hair. The pain was blinding as he yanked me out of the car, sending me sprawling onto the wet ground. The mud soaked through my clothes instantly, but I kept my grip on the pepper spray, hiding it under my body. "You don't get to say no to me," he snarled, standing over me. The knife was back in his hand. "No one says no to me out here." That's when I knew with absolute certainty that he'd done this before, that other women had been in this clearing, that some of them probably never left. He yanked me to my feet by my arm, twisting it painfully behind my back. The knife came up to my throat, the cold metal pressing against my skin. "Walk," he commanded, pushing me toward a darker part of the clearing where the trees thickened. I pretended to stumble, dropping to one knee. As he jerked me up again, I turned and sprayed directly into his face. The effect was instantaneous. He screamed, a high, almost feminine sound, and dropped the knife, hands flying to his eyes. I didn't wait. I ran. I had no idea which direction to go, so I just picked the opposite way from where he'd been pushing me. The ground was slippery with mud and fallen leaves, and I fell twice in the first few seconds, scrambling back up each time. Behind me, I could hear him shouting, cursing, promising what he'd do when he caught me. I ran blindly through the trees, branches whipping my face, roots trying to trip me. The rain had picked up again, and combined with my tears I could barely see. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. I don't know how long I ran, maybe 5 minutes, maybe 15. Time stretched and compressed in my panic. I could still hear him crashing through the undergrowth behind me, though he sounded further away. My lungs burned and my legs felt like they were about to give out when I saw it. A light. Faint, yellowish, through the trees ahead. I changed direction, pushing toward it with everything I had left. As I got closer, I could make out a small cabin with a porch light on. Smoke curled from the chimney. Someone was there. When I broke through the tree line, I nearly collapsed with relief. It was a real cabin, not abandoned, with a truck parked outside. I staggered up to the door and pounded on it with both fists. "Help! Please help me!" My voice was raw from fear and exertion. For a terrifying moment, nothing happened. Then I heard movement inside, and the door opened just a crack, held by a security chain. An older man with a gray beard peered out suspiciously. "What the hell?" he started, but I cut him off. "Please let me in. He's after me. He has a knife." I was sobbing now, glancing frantically over my shoulder at the dark forest. The man's eyes widened, and he closed the door just long enough to undo the chain, then pulled it open wide. "Get in, quick," he said, and I stumbled inside. He slammed the door behind me and threw the deadbolt, then added a wooden bar across it for good measure. "Who's after you?" he asked, reaching for a shotgun that was propped by the door. I tried to explain through gasping breaths. The fake cop, the abduction, the clearing in the woods. The man listened, his face growing grimmer by the second. When I finished, he went to the window and peeked through the curtains. "Don't see nobody out there now, but that don't mean he ain't lurking," he said. He picked up a landline phone, thank God he had one, and dialed 911. I collapsed into a chair by his fireplace, shaking uncontrollably as the adrenaline crashed. The heat from the fire couldn't touch the cold that had settled in my bones. I watched the old man on the phone, explaining the situation, giving the address, demanding they hurry. "They're coming," he told me after hanging up. "About 20 minutes out. Sheriff's deputy is closer, maybe 10 minutes. He handed me a wool blanket. "You're soaked through, gonna catch your death. Wrap up." I took the blanket with trembling hands. Thank you so much." "Name's Ray," he said, keeping the shotgun close as he moved back to the window. "Was about to turn in when I heard you. Lucky I'm a light sleeper. Lucky didn't begin to cover it. If this cabin hadn't been here, if Ray hadn't answered, it was the longest wait of my life, sitting there wrapped in a stranger's blanket, jumping at every sound from outside." Ray kept vigil by the window, occasionally moving to check different angles. He didn't try to make small talk, which I appreciated. I couldn't have managed a normal conversation. When headlights finally swept across the cabin, Ray tensed until he saw the sheriff's vehicle. "It's the real deal," he confirmed, watching as a uniformed deputy approached cautiously, hand on his holstered weapon. Ray opened the door and explained the situation. More police arrived shortly after, and I had to tell my story again and again, to the deputy, to the state troopers who came, to the detective who was called in. They found my car still parked on the side of County Road 18. They found the Crown Victoria abandoned in that clearing. They found evidence, lots of it, that I wasn't the first woman brought there. But the man himself, he vanished. They caught him 3 days later, trying to cross into Washington. The DNA they collected from the clearing matched multiple unsolved cases going back years. Women who disappeared on rural roads. Some were found, others never were. I was lucky. So lucky it terrifies me to think about it. If I hadn't had that pepper spray, if I'd run in a different direction, if Ray hadn't been home that night, it's been a month, and I still wake up screaming. I can't drive alone, especially at night. I jump when I see police lights. I've moved in with my sister temporarily because I can't bear to be alone. The prosecutor says I'll need to testify. I'll do it. I'll look him in the eye in that courtroom and make sure he never has the chance to hurt anyone else. But I know that even when he's locked away, I'll still check my back seat before getting in the car. I'll still keep my doors locked. I'll still carry pepper spray. Because the thing that haunts me most isn't what happened. It's how easily it happened. One wrong turn, one decision to pull over, one moment of trying to follow the rules and do what I was told. That's all it took to almost become another statistic, another case file, another family left wondering what happened to their daughter. I'm alive. I survived, but I'll never be the same person who set out on that rainy drive home. I still get chills thinking about what happened last month. I've been meaning to write this down for weeks, but honestly, I couldn't bring myself to relive it until now. I keep thinking about how differently things could have gone if I'd made just one different choice that night. It was supposed to be a simple drive from Houston to visit my sister in Dallas. Nothing special, just a Thursday night trip I'd made dozens of times before. The weather forecast mentioned rain, but I figured I'd beat the worst of it if I left early enough. I was dead wrong. About 3 hours into my drive, somewhere in the middle of nowhere, Texas, the sky opened up. I'm talking biblical rain, the kind where your wipers can't keep up even at full speed. My visibility dropped to maybe 15 feet ahead, and I was white-knuckling the steering wheel just trying to stay on the road. My gas light had been on for about 20 miles, and the anxiety of potentially running out of fuel in this storm was getting to me. When I spotted a dim gas station sign in the distance, I felt nothing but relief. I remember thinking, thank God, as I pulled off the highway and into the station. It wasn't until I parked under the flickering fluorescent lights that the relief started to fade. This place looked like something out of a nightmare. The gas station was one of those old independent places, not a chain. The building was this faded beige cinder-block structure with bars on the windows. Half the lights on the canopy were out, and the ones that worked were buzzing and flickering. The price sign was so old, it still had those plastic numbers you change manually, and some were missing. I didn't see any other cars except for an old pickup truck parked around the side. I sat there for a minute debating whether to try my luck elsewhere, but my gas gauge was buried below E. I didn't have a choice. I pulled up to a pump and got out, immediately getting soaked by the rain. The card reader on the pump was covered with duct tape and a handwritten sign that said, "Pay inside." Great. When I pushed open the door, a bell jingled and the smell hit me. Stale cigarettes, mildew, and something sickly sweet I couldn't identify. The fluorescent lights inside buzzed loudly and made everything look sallow and sick. Behind the counter was a middle-aged man with thinning hair slicked back against his scalp. When he looked up and smiled at me, my stomach dropped. I can't explain exactly why, but his smile was just wrong. Too wide, too many teeth, and it didn't reach his eyes at all. "Evening," he said, still smiling that weird smile. "Nasty night to be out." I nodded, trying to be polite while also scanning the store. That's when I noticed the other person, a man in a dirty gray hoodie pulled low over his face, pretending to look at beef jerky on a rack. I say pretending because I could feel him watching me. He wasn't actually shopping. He was just moving products around aimlessly. "Just need to fill up pump 4, I said, pulling out my card. The clerk nodded, still smiling. "How much you want on it?" "30 should do it." As the clerk ran my card, I noticed him glance over at Hoodie Guy. It wasn't just a casual look. They definitely exchanged some kind of signal. My heart started beating faster. I tried to convince myself I was being paranoid, that I was just on edge from the storm and the creepy vibe of the place. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The clerk handed back my card with that same unnatural smile. "All set. Drive safe now." I mumbled thanks and turned to leave, feeling both of their eyes on my back. As I walked to the door, Hoodie Guy suddenly moved toward the register, and I heard them murmuring to each other. I didn't stick around to eavesdrop. I pushed through the door and hurried back to my truck. The rain was coming down even harder now, drumming on the metal canopy above the pumps. I filled my tank as quickly as possible, constantly looking over my shoulder. Through the gas station windows, I could see the clerk and Hoodie Guy still talking, both of them occasionally glancing out at me. When the pump clicked off, I hung it up and practically jumped into my truck. As I was fumbling with my keys, I saw movement in my peripheral vision. Hoodie Guy was coming out of the store, walking directly toward me. I managed to get the key in the ignition and start the engine just as he approached my window. He tapped on the glass, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. For a split second, I saw his face under the hood, gaunt, with patchy stubble and eyes that were too bright, too eager. He gestured for me to roll down the window. Against my better judgment, I cracked it an inch. "What?" "Hey man, you got a light?" he asked, pulling a cigarette from his pocket. "No, sorry," I said, already putting the truck in drive. "Hold up a sec," he said, placing his hand on my door. I didn't wait to hear the rest. I hit the gas and peeled out of there, my tires spinning slightly on the wet pavement. In my rearview mirror, I saw him standing there, watching me go. The clerk had come out too and was standing under the canopy. For about 2 minutes, I thought I was in the clear. The relief was washing over me as I merged back onto the highway, still mostly deserted due to the storm. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel, but I was laughing at myself for being so paranoid. What did I think was going to happen anyway? Then I saw the headlights in my rearview mirror. At first I told myself it was just another traveler, someone else crazy enough to be out in this weather. But the headlights were gaining on me fast, way too fast for the conditions, and they were high, like pickup truck high. The vehicle pulled up right behind me, so close I couldn't even see its headlights anymore, just the glow illuminating my cab. Then the driver started flashing their high beams, on off, blinding me through my mirrors. My heart was pounding now. I sped up to 75, then 80, dangerous in the rain, but I was desperate to put some distance between us. The truck matched my speed effortlessly. I changed lanes. It changed lanes. I slowed down drastically. It slowed down too, still riding my bumper. Then it pulled into the left lane and accelerated alongside me. In the brief moment it passed under a highway light, I confirmed my worst fear. It was the same old pickup I'd seen at the gas station, and behind the wheel was Hoodie Guy. He wasn't wearing the hood anymore, and I could see him clearly now, grinning at me through the rain and the darkness. He swerved toward me suddenly, forcing me to jerk the wheel right to avoid being hit. My tires skidded on the wet pavement, and I nearly lost control. Before I could recover, he did it again, more aggressively this time. I hit the brakes hard, and he shot ahead, then immediately slammed on his brakes too. I swerved into the left lane to avoid rear-ending him and floored it, pushing my truck to its limits. For a few seconds I thought I might outrun him, but he was back on my tail within moments. The next time he pulled alongside me, I saw something in his hand, what looked like a tire iron or crowbar. When he swerved at me this time, I couldn't correct fast enough. His truck slammed into my driver's side, sending me fishtailing. I fought the wheel, but it was useless. My truck spun once, twice, and then crashed through the guardrail and down into the ditch alongside the highway. The impact was brutal. My truck landed at an angle, driver's side down. The airbag deployed, slamming into my face and chest. For a few seconds I was completely disoriented, ears ringing, tasting blood in my mouth. Then clarity hit me like a second impact. He was coming. I fumbled for my phone, fingers numb with panic. By some miracle, it was still in my cup holder. I dialed 911 as I unclipped my seatbelt. 911, what's your emergency? Someone ran me off the road, I gasped, struggling to climb up toward the passenger side. He's trying to kill me. I'm on Highway 45, somewhere north of Madisonville, I think. I heard the splash of footsteps in the ditch. Through my cracked windshield, I could see him approaching, crowbar in hand. Sir, are you there? Can you give me an exact location? He's here, I whispered, not daring to speak any louder. He's got a weapon. Please hurry. I dropped the phone without hanging up, hoping the dispatcher would track the signal. The passenger window was cracked but intact. I kicked at it desperately again and again until it finally shattered. I dragged myself through, feeling glass slice into my palms and knees, but adrenaline masked the pain. I tumbled out onto the wet ground just as I heard him reach my truck. He was calling out, voice almost gleeful. Where you at, buddy? Don't make this harder than it needs to be. I scrambled to my feet and ran for the tree line about 30 yards away. The rain was still coming down in sheets, which I hoped would cover the sound of my escape. Behind me, I heard him cursing as he realized I wasn't in the truck. I reached the trees and plunged into the underbrush, not caring about the branches whipping my face. About 50 feet in, I found a dense thicket of bushes and dropped to my belly, crawling underneath. The ground was wet and muddy, but I burrowed in as deep as I could, trying to control my breathing. From my hiding spot, I could see glimpses of the highway and my overturned truck. The hooded man was stalking around it, shining a flashlight into the surrounding area. When he turned toward the trees, I pressed myself flat against the earth, praying he hadn't seen me. "I know you're out here," he shouted, his voice almost lost in the storm. "You should have just given me a ride when I asked." He started toward the tree line, and I held my breath. He was maybe 20 feet into the trees when he stopped, seemingly unsure which way to go. He swung the flashlight in wide arcs, the beam occasionally passing just above my hiding spot. "This could have been so much easier," he called out. "My buddy back at the station says you city folks are always such easy marks." I lay there, frozen with terror, for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Every muscle in my body was cramping from the tension and the cold. The rain seeped through my clothes and mud covered most of my body, but I didn't dare move. Then, in the distance, I heard the most beautiful sound. Sirens. Multiple sirens getting closer. The hooded man heard them too. He cursed loudly and started running back toward the highway. I watched through the bushes as he reached my truck and began rummaging through it frantically. He was looking for valuables, I realized, trying to make it look like a simple robbery. The sirens were very close now. Blue and red lights illuminated the crash scene. The man abandoned my truck and sprinted toward his pickup, which he'd parked a short distance up the highway. He never made it. 2 police cars skidded to a stop, blocking his path. Officers jumped out with guns drawn, shouting commands. The man tried to change direction, but slipped in the mud and fell. Within seconds, they were on him, forcing him face down on the ground and cuffing him. I wanted to run out immediately, but fear kept me frozen in place. What if he had accomplices? What if the gas station clerk was out there too? I stayed hidden until I saw paramedics arrive and more police cars. Only then did I crawl out from my hiding place, legs barely supporting me as I staggered toward the flashing lights. "Help!" I called weakly, then louder, "Help! I'm over here!" An officer spotted me and ran over, supporting me as my legs gave out. I was covered in mud, blood, and rain, shivering uncontrollably. They wrapped me in blankets and guided me to an ambulance, asking me questions I could barely process. The next few hours were a blur of hospital rooms, police interviews, and phone calls to family. I learned that the dispatcher had managed to pinpoint my location from the 911 call. The hooded man, whose name I later learned was Darren Meckler, had a long record of violent offenses. The gas station clerk, his cousin, was arrested later that night. They'd been working together for months, targeting travelers they thought wouldn't be missed right away. I wasn't their first victim, just their first to escape. It's been 4 weeks now. My physical injuries have mostly healed, some cuts, bruises, and a mild concussion. But I still wake up in the middle of the night, gasping for air, convinced I can hear footsteps approaching. I can't drive at night anymore, especially not in the rain. I've started seeing a therapist who says I have PTSD. The police told me I was lucky. If I hadn't trusted my instincts at that gas station, if I hadn't run from my truck, if I hadn't called 911 when I did, any one of those decisions could have ended differently for me. I keep thinking about that moment in the gas station when I first felt something was wrong. That voice in my head saying, "Danger." We're taught to be polite, to ignore our unease, to avoid seeming rude or paranoid. But that night taught me something I'll never forget. That instinct, that gut feeling, is there for a reason. It's the most primitive part of our brain screaming at us to survive. So if you're ever in a situation that just feels wrong, even if you can't explain why, listen to that voice. It might just save your life, like it saved mine. I still can't bring myself to walk home alone at night. It's been 4 months since it happened, but the fear never leaves me. I've tried therapy, I've tried rationalizing it, but nothing helps. I needed to put this down somewhere, to see if anyone has experienced something similar or if I'm just losing my mind. It was a Wednesday night in October. Nothing special about the day. I'd gone to my friend Mike's place after work to watch some playoff games and have a few beers. I'd done this routine dozens of times before. Mike lives about 1.5 miles from my apartment, and I always walk. Always. The neighborhood isn't what you'd call dangerous, just your average suburban area with decent lighting and normal houses. It had started raining around 9 p.m., and by the time I left Mike's place at 11:30, it was coming down pretty steady. Not a downpour, but enough that I needed my umbrella. I remember checking my phone before I left, contemplating an Uber, but decided against it. The rain wasn't that bad, and the walk would help clear my head before bed. The first 10 minutes of my walk were completely normal. The streets were empty because of the rain and the late hour. There were a few cars parked along the curb, some porch lights on, but no one was out. Just the sound of rain hitting my umbrella and the occasional car passing by on the main road a block over. I was about halfway home, walking down Oak Ridge Street, when I first noticed the van. It was one of those white work vans with no windows on the sides. Nothing remarkable about it, the kind plumbers or electricians use. But something felt off. It was driving slowly, maybe 10 map, and staying a consistent distance behind me. Not passing, not parking, just following. At first I tried to shake it off. Maybe they were looking for an address, or maybe they were just driving cautiously because of the rain. I kept walking, but found myself glancing back every few seconds. The van maintained the same distance, headlights illuminating the rain between us. I picked up my pace a little, not wanting to seem paranoid, but my heart was already beating faster. When I reached the corner, instead of continuing straight on my usual route, I made a quick right turn onto Maple Lane. I remember thinking that if the van was just coincidentally going the same way, it would continue straight. It didn't. The van turned right too, still maintaining that same distance. My mouth went dry. This wasn't a coincidence anymore. I quickened my pace again, almost power walking now, and made another turn at the next street. I waited a few seconds, holding my breath, hoping the van would just drive past the intersection. For about 20 seconds, I thought I'd lost it. Relief washed over me, but then I heard the engine again, and those headlights appeared cutting through the rain and darkness. The van had turned onto my street and was now even closer than before, maybe 50 feet behind me. That's when I saw it, through the rain-streaked windshield, illuminated by the dashboard lights, was a silhouette. Just the outline of someone's head and shoulders, but it was enough to send a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold rain. I couldn't make out any features, just that dark shape watching me. My neighborhood has this small park that cuts between two streets. During the day, it's just a patch of grass with a couple of benches and some trees. At night, it's not well lit, but I knew it would get me to the next street faster than following the road. The van couldn't follow me through there. Without hesitating any longer, I turned and sprinted into the park entrance. The grass was slick with rain, and my shoes sank slightly into the mud with each step. I had to close my umbrella to run properly, and within seconds I was soaked, but I didn't care. All I could think about was putting distance between myself and that van. I was about halfway across the park when I heard it, the engine revving loudly, then the distinct sound of tires screeching to a halt. Then came the sound that still haunts my nightmares, a car door sliding open, then slamming shut. I didn't look back. I couldn't. My body was running purely on adrenaline at this point. The park exit seemed impossibly far away. Rain was in my eyes, My clothes were heavy and sticking to my skin, and my lungs were burning. But worse than all of that was the sound I could hear behind me. Heavy footsteps, splashing through puddles, getting closer. When I reached the street on the other side of the park, I had to turn to figure out which way to go. That's when I caught a glimpse of him under one of the few functioning streetlights. He was tall, probably over 6 feet, wearing dark jeans and a black hoodie pulled up over his head. But what made my blood freeze was what he was holding, something that glinted in the streetlight. A knife. Not some small pocket knife, but something bigger, like a hunting knife. I've never run so fast in my life. I abandoned any thoughts of trying to get home directly and just focused on getting away from him. I sprinted down the street, my feet slapping against the wet pavement. I could hear him behind me, his breathing heavy but controlled. Not panicked like mine, like he was pacing himself, like he'd done this before. There's this narrow alley between 2 houses on that street that leads to a back lane. It's barely wide enough for one person to walk through, with high fences on both sides. I made a split-second decision and ducked into it, pressing myself against the fence and trying to control my breathing. There was a large garbage bin about halfway down the alley, and I crouched behind it, making myself as small as possible. The footsteps slowed down. I could hear him reach the entrance to the alley, then silence, except for the sound of the rain and my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I pressed my hand over my mouth to muffle any sound. He was there, standing at the entrance to the alley. I couldn't see him, but I could feel his presence. His breathing was steady, controlled. He was listening, searching. I was trapped. If he came down that alley, there was nowhere for me to go. I don't know how long we stayed like that. Me crouched behind the garbage bin, him at the alley entrance. It felt like hours, but was probably only a minute or two. Then, finally, I heard his footsteps moving away, not running, just walking steadily, like he had all the time in the world. I stayed there for what must have been another 20 minutes, shivering in my wet clothes, too terrified to move. Eventually, I got my phone out with trembling hands to call for help, but the screen was wet from the rain and wouldn't respond properly. I had to wipe it repeatedly on the inside of my shirt just to get it to work. I tried calling Mike first, but it went to voicemail. He was probably asleep. I thought about calling 911, but what would I say? That someone followed me? That I thought he had a knife? I had no proof, and he was probably long gone by now. In the end, I called an Uber, giving my location as the house next to the alley entrance. I kept checking both ends of the alley while waiting for the Uber. Every sound made me jump, the wind rustling through trees, a distant car door, some animal moving in the dark. When the Uber's headlights finally appeared on the street, I ran out to it like it was my lifeline. The driver must have thought I was crazy, soaking wet, breathing hard, constantly checking the rearview mirror. I just told him I got caught in the rain and was late getting home. He didn't ask questions, thank God. Once I got back to my apartment, I locked the door, then checked that I'd locked it, then checked again. I pulled all the blinds down and turned on every light. I took a hot shower, but couldn't stop shaking. When I finally checked my phone, it was almost 1 a.m. I called the police the next morning. They took my statement and said they'd patrol the area, but I could tell they weren't taking it too seriously. Probably just some drunk guy, one of the officers suggested. Or maybe he lived in the neighborhood and was just taking a shortcut through the park. But I know what I saw. That van was following me. That man was chasing me. He had a knife. And the way he moved, it wasn't random. It was calculated, practiced. I've changed my routine completely since then. I don't walk anywhere alone after dark. I've installed extra locks on my doors and windows. I've even looked into self-defense classes, though I haven't worked up the courage to actually go yet. The worst part is not knowing who he was or why he chose me, or if he's still out there looking for me. Sometimes when I'm driving, I find myself checking for white vans in my rearview mirror. When I hear a car slow down near me, my heart rate spikes. I keep wondering what would have happened if I hadn't hidden in that alley, or if he had decided to come down it. I wonder if there have been other people who weren't as lucky as me. I check the local news regularly for reports of attacks or missing persons, half expecting to see something that might connect to what happened to me. Nothing so far, but that almost makes it worse, like it's unfinished business. Last week, I was leaving the grocery store, and I swear I saw a white van identical to the one that night, parked at the far end of the lot. I almost had a panic attack right there in the parking lot. I couldn't even make it to my car. I went back inside the store and asked a security guard to walk me out. The van was gone when we came out. The guard probably thought I was overreacting, but I don't care. I still don't know if what I experienced was a random act or if I was specifically targeted. I don't know if he's given up or if he's just waiting for another opportunity. All I know is that a part of me is always looking over my shoulder now, always listening for footsteps behind me, always scanning for white vans. I used to think my neighborhood was safe. I used to think I was safe. Now I know better. That sense of security was just an illusion all along. So that's my story. I don't know what else to say except be careful out there. Pay attention to your surroundings. Trust your instincts. And if you ever see a white van following you on a rainy night, don't do what I did and try to lose it on your own. Call for help immediately, because he might still be out there, driving slowly, watching, waiting for someone else to walk home alone in the rain. I still have nightmares about that night. It's been over a year, but I can't shake the feeling that he's out there, waiting. Maybe writing this out will help, but I honestly don't know if anything will ever make me feel normal again. It happened last October during that massive storm system that swept through the Midwest. I was driving back from a work conference in Chicago to my home in Columbus, about a 6-hour drive that I'd made dozens of times before. The rain started about 2 hours into my trip. Not just regular rain, but the kind that makes your wipers useless, even at full speed. I should have pulled over, found a motel somewhere, but I just wanted to get home. I was on a stretch of rural highway in western Indiana when I saw him. Just a dark figure at first, thumb out, completely drenched on the shoulder of the road. There wasn't a car or building in sight, just endless cornfields stripped bare after harvest. I've always had a strict no hitchhikers policy. My dad drilled that into me since I first got my license. But something about seeing someone so completely stranded in that biblical downpour got to me. The temperature was dropping fast, and the weather alert on my phone had been warning about flash floods. I kept thinking, what if that was me standing out there? I slowed down, pulled over about 20 feet ahead of him, and watched in my rear view as he jogged to my car. I unlocked the passenger door, and he slid in, bringing with him the smell of rain and wet clothes. "Holy shit, thank you," he said, breathing hard. "I thought I was going to drown out there." He was younger than me, early 20s maybe, with dark hair plastered to his forehead from the rain, skinny, wearing jeans and a soaked blue hoodie with a black backpack. Nothing threatening about him. He just looked miserable and grateful. "Where you headed?" I asked, pulling back onto the empty highway. The rain hammered against the roof of my Honda Civic like we were inside a drum. "Just trying to get to Indianapolis," he said, wiping water from his face. "My mom's in the hospital there. Cancer. I took the bus out to see her, but I missed the last one back and I can't afford a hotel." I felt that swell of validation. See, I was right to stop. This wasn't some psycho, just a kid trying to get back from visiting his sick mother. "I'm Jake," he said, extending his hand. "Mark," I replied, shaking it briefly before returning my hand to the wheel. The roads were getting slick. For the next 20 minutes or so, everything was fine. We made small talk about the storm, about how the forecasters had underestimated its severity. He asked what I did for work, accounting. I asked about his mom, supposedly responding well to treatment. The rain was still coming down in sheets, and visibility was getting worse by the minute. That's when I first noticed the change. Jake had gone quiet, and when I glanced over, he was staring straight ahead, his expression completely different from the relieved, grateful guy I'd picked up. It was like a mask had slipped. "Hey, would you mind taking a different route?" he asked, his voice flat now. "There's a turnoff about 5 miles ahead. I need to make a stop first." "Sorry, man, with this weather I just want to stay on the main road," I said, tightening my grip on the steering wheel. "I can drop you at a bus station in Indianapolis if that works." He didn't respond, and that silence felt heavier than the storm outside. I kept my eyes on the road, but I could feel him watching me. Then I heard the zipper of his backpack. "Pull over at the next turn," he said, and this time there was no room for negotiation in his voice. I looked over and saw the knife in his hand. It wasn't some little pocket knife. It was a hunting knife with a blade that had to be 8 or 9 inches long. My stomach dropped like I was on a roller coaster. "Whoa, Jake, what the hell?" My voice came out higher than normal. "Just do what I say and you won't get hurt," he said calmly, like he was telling me the weather forecast. "Turn right at the next dirt road." My mind was racing. Should I crash the car? Try to grab the knife? But one look at how steadily he was holding it told me he knew what he was doing. And in these conditions, swerving off the road might kill us both. "Look, just take my wallet, my phone, whatever you want," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "The next right," he repeated, pointing the knife a little closer to my side. I took the turn. The dirt road was already turning to mud, my tires slipping as we went deeper into farmland. Jake directed me through 2 more turns, each road narrower and more isolated than the last. We were heading into a wooded area now, the trees creating a dark tunnel even though it was only around 4 p.m. "Stop here," he said, as we approached what looked like an old barn in a small clearing. It was dilapidated, with parts of the roof missing and weathered gray wood that looked like it might collapse in the storm. I put the car in park, my hands shaking so badly I almost couldn't manage it. The rain was still pouring down, drumming on the roof of my car. "Give me the keys and get out," he ordered. I handed him my keys and watched as he pocketed them. "Now walk to the barn, don't try anything stupid." The ground was a muddy mess. My shoes sank in with each step as I trudged toward the barn, rain soaking through my jacket in seconds. Jake stayed a few feet behind me, and I could feel the presence of that knife even though I couldn't see it. The barn door protested with a loud creak when I pushed it open. The inside smelled like rotting wood and old hay. There were gaps in the walls and roof where rain was getting in, creating small puddles on the dirt floor. Farm equipment that looked like it hadn't been used in decades, rusted in corners. The place was clearly abandoned, probably for years. "Sit there." Jake pointed to a wooden post in the center of the barn. I sat on the damp ground, my back against the post. From his backpack, Jake pulled out a coil of rope. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. "Please," I said, hating how my voice cracked. "I have a family." "Tie your feet together," he said, tossing me the rope. "Make it tight, I'll check." With trembling hands, I wrapped the rope around my ankles. I considered making it loose enough that I might slip free, but the look in his eyes told me he wasn't bluffing about checking. After I finished, he came over and yanked on the rope, apparently satisfied with my work. Then he pulled my arms behind the post and bound my wrists together tightly. The rough rope bit into my skin. "What do you want from me?" I asked, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. "Is this a robbery? Because I don't have much cash, but you can have it all." Jake crouched in front of me, knife still in hand. In the dim light filtering through the barn's broken roof, his face looked different, harder, older somehow. "We're going to wait here until morning," he said simply. "The storm's too bad to keep driving. You try to escape, you'll regret it." He twirled the knife casually between his fingers. "Why are you doing this?" I asked. He ignored the question, moving to sit against the opposite wall where he could watch me. The knife never left his hand. Hours passed. The storm continued to rage outside, wind howling through the cracks in the barn walls. Jake barely spoke, occasionally checking his phone or pacing around the barn. I kept trying to engage him, thinking maybe I could appeal to his humanity or at least understand what he wanted. "Is there someone else coming?" I asked at one point. The thought that this might be a setup, that others might arrive, terrified me even more. "Just be quiet," he snapped. As night fell, the barn grew pitch black except for the occasional flash of lightning that illuminated Jake's silhouette. The temperature dropped, and my wet clothes clung to me, sending shivers through my body. My wrists were raw from the rope, and my shoulders ached from being pulled behind the post. I must have been in shock, because my mind kept drifting to absurdly normal thoughts. I was supposed to call my sister tomorrow for her birthday. My dog needed his heartworm medicine. The quarterly reports were due next week. Then reality would crash back, and a wave of terror would wash over me again. Around what must have been midnight, the storm began to ease slightly. The gaps between thunderclaps grew longer. Jake had been silent for a while, and in a flash of lightning I could see his head drooping. He was fighting sleep. I stayed as still as possible, afraid any movement would alert him. My entire focus narrowed to the knife still clutched in his hand. If he fell asleep, if that knife slipped just a little, it felt like another hour before I heard it, the soft, rhythmic breathing that told me Jake had finally dozed off. I waited, counting my own heartbeats, making sure it wasn't a trick. When a particularly bright flash of lightning showed his slumped form and closed eyes, I knew this was my chance. The rope around my wrists was tight, but I had been subtly working at it whenever Jake wasn't looking directly at me. My hands were slick with sweat and blood from where the rough fibers had rubbed my skin raw, which actually helped. I twisted and pulled, ignoring the burning pain as the rope dug deeper into my flesh. Then, miraculously, I felt my right hand slip through. It took every ounce of willpower not to gasp out loud. Slowly, carefully, I worked my left hand free too. My feet were still bound, but I could deal with that once I was away from Jake. I froze when I heard him mumble something in his sleep. The knife had slipped a few inches down his palm, but he was still holding it. I couldn't risk trying to take it from him. If he woke up while I was that close, I'd be dead for sure. Instead, I looked around the barn for anything I could use to defend myself. In the next lightning flash, I spotted it, a rusty pitchfork leaning against the wall about 10 feet away. If I could reach it before untying my feet, I'd have some protection. I began to inch across the dirt floor, dragging my bound feet behind me, holding my breath at every sound. The distance seemed enormous, each movement painfully slow. Halfway there, my hand came down on something that cracked, a small piece of wood. The sound seemed deafening in the quiet barn. Jake stirred. I flattened myself against the ground, praying he wouldn't wake up. After a moment of agonizing stillness, his breathing returned to its steady rhythm. Finally, my fingers closed around the wooden handle of the pitchfork. It was heavier than I expected, the metal tines crusted with rust. I worked at the rope around my ankles with one hand while keeping the pitchfork ready with the other. The knot was stubborn, but eventually I managed to loosen it enough to pull my feet free. Just as I stood up, another flash of lightning illuminated the barn, and Jake's open eyes staring directly at me. He lunged forward with a speed I wasn't prepared for, knife raised. Pure instinct took over, and I swung the pitchfork with all my strength. I felt the impact as one of the tines connected with his shoulder. He let out a pained yell, stumbling backward. I didn't wait to see more. I ran, pitchfork still in hand, stumbling through the barn door into the rain. The storm had weakened, but was still coming down hard enough to blur my vision. I sprinted toward my car, praying that Jake had left the keys in the ignition. Behind me, I heard him shouting, his voice lost in a crack of thunder. I reached the car and yanked open the door. The keys were there, dangling from the ignition. I threw the pitchfork into the passenger seat, started the engine, and slammed the car into reverse, nearly hydroplaning as I backed away from the barn. Through the rain-streaked windshield, I saw Jake emerge from the barn, one hand clutching his shoulder, the other still holding that knife. Our eyes met for a second before I hit the gas and tore down the muddy road. I had no idea where I was going. The roads were unfamiliar, and in the dark and rain, everything looked the same. I just kept driving, taking turns whenever I saw them, desperate to find my way back to the highway. My hands were bleeding onto the steering wheel, my whole body shaking so badly I could barely control the car. After what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, I saw the blessed sight of a gas station, its fluorescent lights cutting through the darkness. I pulled in and ran inside, babbling to the startled night clerk about being kidnapped, begging him to call the police. The police came, took my statement, and sent officers to the barn. But by the time they got there, Jake was gone. They found evidence someone had been there. Blood from where I'd struck him with the pitchfork, the rope he'd used to tie me up, but no sign of Jake himself. They searched the surrounding area for days, but nothing turned up. No one matching his description was admitted to any local hospitals for a shoulder wound. The barn was on private property, owned by a bank that had foreclosed on it years ago. The car I was driving was clean, no fingerprints except mine. It was like he'd vanished into thin air. The police suggested he might have given me a fake name, that visiting his sick mother was just a story to gain my sympathy. They pulled missing persons reports, wanted lists, checked for similar incidents along that highway. Nothing matched. I've spent countless hours since then searching news reports, scanning police blotters, looking for any sign of him or similar attacks. Sometimes I think I see his face in a crowd, and my blood turns to ice before I realize it's just my imagination. The doctors say I have PTSD. I've moved to a new apartment with better security, changed jobs to one that doesn't require travel. I don't drive at night anymore, and I've mapped out every route I take to make sure I never accidentally pass near that area again. But the worst part is not knowing why. Was I just in the wrong place at the wrong time? Was he planning to kill me and lost his nerve? Was he working with others who never showed up? The police have theories but no answers. All I know is that somewhere out there, Jake, or whatever his real name is still walking around with that knife. And every time it rains, I can't help but look at the stranger standing on the side of the road, wondering if he's waiting for someone else to make the same mistake I did. I still can't sleep through the night. It's been 3 months since it happened, but every time I close my eyes, I see their faces. I've been putting off writing this down because part of me hoped that maybe if I didn't think about it, it would eventually fade away. But the nightmares aren't stopping. My therapist suggested I try to get it all out, so here goes. It happened back in November when I was driving from Seattle to visit my sister in Portland. I know. Everybody says don't drive through the rural Pacific Northwest during storm season, but I'd made the trip dozens of times and never had issues before. The forecast only called for light rain, and I figured I'd be fine in my old Honda Civic. The rain started about an hour into my drive. Nothing major at first, just a drizzle. But within 20 minutes, it turned into one of those insane downpours where you can barely see 10 feet in front of you. I slowed down to like 30 or some, my wipers going full blast, but hardly making a difference. The roads were getting slick, and there was hardly any traffic, just me and the occasional semi that would barrel past, sending a wall of water over my windshield. I decided to take a shortcut on Route 12 that cuts through some farmland. Big mistake. The road conditions got worse, potholes everywhere, and the shoulder was turning into mud. That's when my car started making this horrible grinding noise. Then warning lights flashed across my dashboard, and before I could even pull over, the engine just died. I tried restarting it maybe 15 times. Nothing. Just that clicking sound when the battery's connected but the engine won't turn over. My phone showed no service. Not surprising given where I was. I sat there for about 45 minutes, hoping someone would drive by. But not a single car passed. The rain was coming down so hard, it sounded like someone was throwing rocks at my car. It was getting dark, and the temperature was dropping. I knew I couldn't stay in my car all night. I'd freeze. That's when I noticed it. A faint yellow light in the distance, maybe half a mile through the fields. A house. I grabbed my backpack, pulled my raincoat hood up, and stepped out into the storm. The wind nearly knocked me over, and within seconds I was soaked through. The mud was so thick it kept trying to suck my shoes off. Every step was a struggle. I kept my eyes fixed on that light, which seemed to get farther away the longer I walked. By the time I reached what turned out to be a 2-story farmhouse, I was shivering uncontrollably. The house looked old but maintained, white paint peeling a bit, wrap-around porch with a swing, warm light coming from windows with faded curtains. I practically crawled up the porch steps and knocked on the door, praying someone would answer. The door opened, and there stood this big guy. Must have been at least 6'4", probably 280 pounds. He had a thick gray beard and was wearing a red flannel shirt with suspenders. He looked startled to see me. "Jesus, you're soaked through. What the hell are you doing out in this weather?" he asked, his voice gruff but concerned. I explained about my car breaking down, apologizing for showing up at his door. He introduced himself as Tom and ushered me inside. The warmth hit me immediately. They had a wood stove going in what looked like a living room. "Martha," he called out, "we got a visitor needs help." A thin woman with long gray hair pulled back in a bun came in from what I guessed was the kitchen. She was wearing an apron over a floral dress that looked straight out of the 1950s. She seemed shocked to see me standing there dripping on their hardwood floor. "Oh my goodness," she said, her voice higher pitched than I expected. "You poor thing." "Tom, get some towels." They were both so nice at first. Martha brought me a change of clothes. "Belonged to my sister when she visited last summer," she said, and showed me to a bathroom where I could change. The clothes were a bit big but dry, which was all I cared about. Tom made hot coffee, and Martha heated up some stew. As I sat at their kitchen table warming up, I asked if I could use their phone to call for a tow truck. That's when things got a little weird. "Phone lines are always the first to go in these storms," Tom said, shaking his head. "Been out since this morning." "Cell phone?" I asked. Martha laughed, a strange, high-pitched sound that didn't match her grandmotherly appearance. "No reception out here, dear. We're in what you might call a dead zone." Something about the way she said dead zone made my skin crawl, but I brushed it off. They were helping me after all. Tom said he used to be a mechanic and could take a look at my car in the morning. "No sense heading back out in this weather tonight. Storm's supposed to get worse." They offered me their spare bedroom for the night, and I gratefully accepted. What else could I do? The spare room was on the second floor, at the end of a narrow hallway. It was small, with faded wallpaper and a twin bed with an old iron frame. A crucifix hung on one wall, and there was a dresser with nothing on it except a Bible and an old oil lamp. The window looked out over the backyard, though I couldn't see much in the darkness and rain. Martha brought me extra blankets and said, "Sleep tight now. Don't mind any noises you might hear. Old house creaks something awful during storms." I thanked her and settled in, exhaustion hitting me hard. Despite my unease, I fell asleep almost immediately. I woke up suddenly at what must have been around 2 a.m. At first I wasn't sure what had woken me, but then I heard it. Whispering coming from somewhere beyond the wall behind my bed. I couldn't make out the words, just the urgent tone. A man and woman speaking in hushed, intense voices. I lay perfectly still, straining to hear. The whispering stopped, and then there were footsteps. Someone moving slowly down the hallway outside my door. The floorboards creaked with each step. Then the footsteps stopped, right outside my room. I held my breath and closed my eyes almost completely, leaving just the tiniest slit to see through. The door handle turned slowly, and the door opened a few inches. A slice of dim light fell across the floor. I could make out a silhouette, Tom's broad shoulders, standing in the doorway, just watching me. He stood there for what felt like forever, not moving, not speaking. Then he slowly pulled the door closed and walked away. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. Something was very, very wrong. I waited until I couldn't hear any more movement, then got up as quietly as possible. I put on the clothes I'd been wearing earlier, still damp but wearable, and crept to the door. Opening it just a crack, I peered into the hallway. Empty. I tiptoed down the hall toward the stairs, wincing at every creak of the floorboards. As I passed what must have been Tom and Martha's bedroom, I heard them talking again, their voices clearer now. "Needs to be ready by morning," Martha was saying. "I know what I'm doing," Tom responded, sounding irritated. "Done this plenty before. The last one made such a mess. Make sure you—" She stopped suddenly. "Did you hear something?" I froze, not even breathing. After a moment, Tom said, "It's nothing. Go to sleep." I crept down the stairs, skipping the third step from the bottom that I'd noticed was particularly squeaky when I'd come up earlier. The front door was directly ahead, and I made a beeline for it. My hand was actually on the doorknob when a floorboard creaked behind me. "Going somewhere?" I spun around to find Tom standing at the bottom of the stairs, wearing only a white undershirt and pajama bottoms. In the dim light, I could see tattoos covering his arms, not the kind of art you'd get at a regular shop, but crude, jail-style markings. I, just needed some air, I stammered. In the middle of the night? During a storm? He took a step toward me. I don't think so. I yanked the door open, but he moved faster than I would have thought possible for a man his size. His hand slammed the door shut, inches from my face. "Martha," he bellowed, "she's trying to leave." I tried to duck under his arm, but he grabbed me, his fingers digging into my shoulder so hard I felt like my collarbone would snap. I screamed and fought, kicking and clawing at him, but it was like fighting a brick wall. Martha appeared at the bottom of the stairs, and what I saw made my blood run cold. She was holding a large kitchen knife, its blade gleaming in the dim light. "Now, why would you want to leave us?" she asked, her voice eerily calm. "We've been so hospitable." Tom forced me into a chair in the kitchen while Martha tied my wrists to the armrests with rope she seemed to have ready for just this purpose. They worked with practiced efficiency that terrified me more than anything else. This wasn't the first time they'd done this. "Please," I begged, "I won't tell anyone. Just let me go." "Oh, we will, dear," Martha said, patting my cheek with her cold, bony hand. "Just not quite yet." They left me tied to that chair for what felt like hours, occasionally coming in to check on me. They never said what they planned to do, which somehow made it worse. My mind went to the darkest places, imagining what they might have done to others who had the misfortune to knock on their door. Around dawn, Tom untied me from the chair, but kept my hands bound in front of me. "Time to move you," he said gruffly. He marched me through the back door and across the muddy yard to a small wooden shed about 50 feet from the house. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, but the ground was a swamp. The shed looked like a typical storage building. Weathered wood, small window on one side, padlock on the door. Tom unlocked it and shoved me inside. It was dark and smelled of earth and rusted metal. I could make out shapes of tools hanging on the walls and piled in corners. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, my voice breaking. He just looked at me with empty eyes. "Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a big day." Then he closed the door, and I heard the padlock click into place. I stood there in shock for a few minutes, then broke down sobbing. But crying wasn't going to save me. I had to think. I fumbled around in the dim light coming through the dirty window, looking for anything that might help me. My hands were still tied, but the rope was loose enough that I could move them separately. After some searching, I found an old hand saw with a rusty blade hanging on a nail. It was awkward, but I managed to start sawing at the rope, binding my wrists. It took forever, the rusty teeth of the saw making slow progress through the thick rope, but eventually my hands were free. My next thought was to try the window, but it was too small for me to squeeze through. That left the door. I examined it in the fading evening light. The door itself was solid wood, but the frame looked old and partially rotted at the bottom. The hinges were on the inside, a stroke of luck. Using the saw and various other tools I found in the shed, I worked on the bottom hinge, removing the screws bit by bit. Every sound from outside made me freeze, certain that Tom or Martha was coming back. The work was painfully slow, and my hands were soon bleeding from the rusty tools and splinters, but fear gave me strength I didn't know I had. Finally, as night fell completely, I removed the last screw from the bottom hinge. The door sagged but stayed in place because of the top hinge and the padlock. I pushed and pulled until I created a gap just big enough to squeeze through at the bottom. I crawled out into the mud and rain, which had started up again. The house loomed about 50 yards away, a single light burning in what looked like the kitchen window. I could see silhouettes moving inside. They were still awake. I had to make a run for it. But which way? I had no idea which direction the road was from here. I decided to head in the opposite direction from where I thought we'd come the previous night, hoping to circle around eventually and find the road. I ran through the fields, slipping and falling in the mud repeatedly. The rain plastered my hair to my face and got in my eyes. I was crying and hyperventilating, certain that at any moment I'd hear Tom shouting behind me. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like they would give out. Finally, I collapsed behind a large tree, trying to catch my breath. That's when I heard it, a car engine. Somewhere in the distance, there was a road. I forced myself up and moved toward the sound. After what seemed like forever, I spotted headlights cutting through the rain. I stumbled out onto the pavement, waving my arms frantically. The car, a pickup truck, screeched to a halt. An older man rolled down his window, eyes wide with shock. "Jesus Christ, are you okay?" he asked. I wasn't. I was covered in mud, blood, and rain, half hysterical as I tried to explain what happened. The man, Bill, I later learned, helped me into his truck and drove straight to the nearest police station in a town called Oak Ridge. The police took my statement, though I could tell they were skeptical at first. That changed when they sent officers to the farmhouse and found the shed with the broken door and the chair with cut ropes in the kitchen. But Tom and Martha, gone, vanished completely. There was food still on the stove, clothes in the closets, but no sign of the couple. The investigation revealed the property had been owned by a Thomas and Martha Crenshaw, who had died in a house fire in 1987. Someone had been squatting there, using their identities. The police found disturbing evidence in the basement, personal belongings that might have belonged to other victims, though they wouldn't give me details. They never found Tom and Martha, if those were even their real names. The case is still open. I've moved in with my sister now. I can't stand being alone. I jump at every noise and can't sleep with the lights off. My therapist says I have PTSD, which isn't surprising. Sometimes I wake up certain that Tom is standing in my doorway watching me sleep. I don't know what they plan to do to me in that farmhouse. Maybe that's the worst part. My imagination fills in the blanks with possibilities too horrible to put into words. All I know is that I was meant to disappear that night like who knows how many others before me. If you're ever driving alone in the rain and your car breaks down, please stay in your car. No matter how cold it gets, no matter how tempting that distant light might seem, sometimes the storm is safer than the shelter. Nay. I still can't believe I'm actually typing this out. My hands are shaking even now, 3 weeks later. I keep telling myself that writing about it might help me process what happened, but honestly, I'm not sure anything will ever make me feel normal again. It was exactly 23 days ago. I was driving back to Vegas after visiting my sister in Salt Lake City. I'd left later than planned, around 4 p.m., which meant I was hitting that long, empty stretch of Nevada highway well after dark. The rain had started about an hour into Nevada, just a drizzle at first, but it turned into this absolute downpour that made visibility almost zero. I was already exhausted, and the combination of pitch darkness and heavy rain was making the drive a nightmare. I remember checking the time, 11:37 p.m., and calculating how much longer I had until I reached home. About 3 more hours if the weather held steady, which wasn't looking likely. The wipers were going full blast and barely keeping up. There were no other cars on the road, which wasn't surprising given the location and the weather. I was alone in the middle of nowhere, just me and my 2012 Toyota Camry against the elements. I had the radio on low, just to keep me company. Some late-night talk show about conspiracy theories that I wasn't really paying attention to. I was mostly focused on not hydroplaning off the road. I'd slowed down to about 45 mph, which felt painfully slow for a highway, but the rain made anything faster feel dangerous. That's when I saw him. Just a dark shape at first, hunched over on the shoulder of the road. My headlights caught the reflection of something, probably his soaked clothes, and I remember thinking it was strange to see anyone out here, especially in this weather. My first instinct was to keep driving. It was late, I was alone, and stopping for strangers on deserted highways isn't exactly recommended, but something made me slow down even more. As I got closer, I could see it was definitely a person, and they appeared to be in distress, hunched over, arms wrapped around themselves, completely drenched. I hesitated for a few seconds, debating with myself. What if they needed medical help? What if their car had broken down and they had no cell service? Mine was showing just one bar, so that was entirely possible out here. I'm not normally someone who stops for strangers, especially at night, but I kept thinking about my brother who'd once been stranded for hours on a similar stretch of road when his car broke down. He'd told me how terrifying it was, watching car after car pass by without stopping. So I pulled over about 20 feet ahead of the figure. I left my headlights on and the engine running, not taking any unnecessary risks. I grabbed my heavy Maglite flashlight from the glove compartment. It was the type that could double as a weapon if needed, which gave me a small sense of security. I stepped out into the rain and was immediately soaked. The rain was coming down in sheets, and the wind made it feel like ice needles against my skin. I turned on my flashlight and called out, "Hey, you okay?" The figure looked up at my voice but didn't respond. I couldn't make out much detail from that distance, just that it was a man, maybe in his 30s or 40s, with dark hair plastered to his face from the rain. "Do you need help?" I called again, walking a bit closer but still keeping a good distance. "Did your car break down?" The man finally started moving toward me, slowly. As he got closer, I could see he was completely drenched, wearing jeans and what looked like a dark hoodie. His face was pale, almost gray in my flashlight beam. He looked exhausted and desperate. "Thank God," he said, his voice barely audible over the rain. "My car broke down about a mile back. Phone's dead. I've been walking for hours." I felt a wave of relief that this seemed like a legitimate emergency and not some weird trap. Still, I kept my distance and a firm grip on my flashlight. "Where are you headed?" I asked, trying to assess the situation before committing to anything. "Ely," he said, mentioning a town that was about 70 miles ahead. "Just need to get to a service station or somewhere with a phone." I nodded, making a quick decision. "I can give you a ride to the next town. There should be a gas station or something open." He looked so relieved that I felt good about my decision to stop. Here was someone genuinely in need, and I was able to help. I gestured toward my car. "It's dry in there at least, and I've got some water if you're thirsty." That's when something changed. It happened so fast that at first I thought I was imagining it. His expression shifted. The desperate, grateful look vanished, replaced by something cold and calculating. His eyes narrowed, focusing on me with an intensity that made my stomach drop. Before I could process what was happening, he lunged forward. His hand shot out, knocking the flashlight from my grip. It fell to the muddy ground, its beam creating eerie shadows as it rolled. In the same motion, he slammed into me with the force of a linebacker. I went down hard, the back of my head hitting the wet asphalt with a sickening thud that left me seeing stars. The rain was still pouring down, soaking into my clothes, my hair, my eyes. I was disoriented from the fall, but adrenaline kicked in immediately. The man was on top of me now, his weight pinning me to the ground. His hands found my throat with terrifying precision, like he'd done this before. The pressure was immediate and brutal. His thumbs dug into my windpipe while his fingers wrapped around the sides of my neck. I couldn't breathe, couldn't scream, could barely think beyond the primal need for air. I thrashed beneath him, trying to buck him off, but he was solid, probably outweighing me by at least 50 pounds. The rain made everything slippery, and my hands couldn't find purchase on his soaked clothing. Every time I tried to push him away, my fingers just slid off his arms or chest. Black spots started dancing at the edges of my vision. I knew I had seconds, not minutes, before I'd lose consciousness. And if that happened, my right hand was frantically searching the ground beside me, hoping to find a rock, a stick, anything I could use as a weapon. Instead, my fingers brushed against something smooth and cylindrical, my flashlight. With every ounce of strength I had left, I wrapped my fingers around it and swung it toward his head. The first blow glanced off his shoulder. I was too weak, too awkward in my position to get good aim, but it was enough to make him shift his weight slightly, easing the pressure on my throat just enough for me to gasp a precious breath of air. That single breath gave me renewed strength. I swung again, and this time the heavy metal flashlight connected solidly with the side of his head. He grunted in pain, and his grip loosened. I hit him again, harder, aiming for the same spot. This time he fell sideways, momentarily stunned. I didn't waste the opportunity. I scrambled out from under him, slipping and sliding in the mud as I fought to get to my feet. My throat was on fire, and I was coughing and gasping, but the only thought in my mind was, get to the car. I could hear him behind me, cursing as he recovered and started to give chase. My car was only about 20 feet away, but it felt like miles. The rain and mud made every step treacherous. I slipped once, going down on one knee, and the terror that surged through me at that stumble gave me the adrenaline boost I needed to push forward. I reached my car, yanked open the driver's door, and threw myself inside. My hands were shaking so badly that I almost couldn't hit the lock button, but I managed to slam it down just as my attacker reached the car. His face appeared at my window, twisted with rage. He pounded on the glass with both fists, screaming something I couldn't understand over the sound of the rain and my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. The whole car shook with the force of his assault. I was terrified the window might break. I fumbled with my keys, dropping them once before managing to get them into the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I threw the car into drive, stepping on the gas so hard that the tires spun momentarily before finding grip on the wet asphalt. As I accelerated away, I caught a final glimpse of him in my rearview mirror, standing in the middle of the road, still screaming, his figure growing smaller as I put distance between us. I kept expecting to see headlights appear behind me, some vehicle he had hidden nearby, but none came. I drove like a maniac for at least 20 minutes, constantly checking my mirrors, before I saw signs for a small town ahead. I pulled into the first lit building I saw, a 24-hour truck stop with a diner attached. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely put the car in park. Inside, I must have looked like a complete wreck, soaking wet, covered in mud, with what I would later discover were darkening bruises around my neck. The night manager took one look at me and called the police. The local sheriff's deputy arrived about 15 minutes later. I gave my statement, describing everything that had happened and where. They took photos of my injuries and the mud on my clothes as evidence. The deputy immediately radioed for another unit to check out the location where the attack happened, but I already knew they wouldn't find him. Something told me he was long gone. They did find evidence of our struggle, footprints in the mud, signs of the scuffle on the roadside, but my attacker had vanished completely. No abandoned vehicle was found in the area, despite my mention of his story about a broken-down car. The deputy suggested he might have had an accomplice waiting nearby, or that the whole broken-down car story was just a ruse to get someone to stop. I spent that night in a motel room paid for by the sheriff's department, too shaken to continue driving. They offered to have someone stay with me or outside my door, but I declined. I just wanted to be alone, to process what had happened. The next morning, after giving a more detailed statement and having a forensic photographer document my injuries, which looked even worse in daylight, I continued my drive home. Every mile was torture. Every figure on the roadside made my heart race. I had to pull over twice because panic attacks made it impossible to drive. It's been 3 weeks now. The bruises on my neck have faded from purple to yellow-green. My voice is almost back to normal, but everything else has changed. I jump at unexpected noises. I've installed 3 new locks on my apartment door. I bought a security system that probably cost more than my rent. I haven't driven anywhere after dark since it happened. The police haven't found him. They showed me mugshots of known offenders in the area, but none of them were him. They've added his description to some database, but the detective assigned to my case has been honest about the chances of finding him, slim to none. Rural Nevada has too many places to hide, too many small roads and vast empty spaces. Sometimes I wonder if he's still out there, standing by some deserted roadside in the rain, waiting for another good Samaritan to stop. I wonder how many people before me fell for the same trap, and I wonder how many didn't get away. I know one thing for certain. I'll never stop for a stranger again, no matter how desperate they look, no matter how awful the weather, no matter how much I want to help. That decision nearly cost me my life. If you're reading this and you drive alone, especially at night, please be careful. Keep your doors locked. Don't stop for strangers. It doesn't matter if that makes you feel callous or cold. I'd rather live with the guilt of driving past someone who genuinely needed help than not live at all. I still don't know who he was or why he attacked me. Was he trying to steal my car? Was he going to rob me? Or was it something worse? The not knowing is almost as bad as the memories of those hands around my throat. The rain continues to terrify me. Even the sound of it on my window at night wakes me from sleep, heart pounding, throat tight with remembered fear. I keep the flashlight beside my bed now. Sometimes I hold it while I try to fall asleep. I don't know if I'll ever feel safe again. I still can't sleep when it rains. I've tried everything: sleeping pills, therapy, even one of those white noise machines. Nothing helps. As soon as I hear raindrops hitting the roof, my heart starts racing and I'm right back there in that cabin. It happened 3 months ago. I was driving back from visiting my sister in Appleton, about 4 hours from where I live. The weather forecast had mentioned a chance of rain, but nothing prepared me for the absolute downpour that hit as I was passing through a heavily wooded area with barely any cell service. At first, I thought I could power through it. The rain was coming down in sheets and my windshield wipers couldn't keep up. I slowed to maybe 20 mph, leaning forward and squinting just to see a few feet ahead of me. That's when I heard it, a loud pop followed by the unmistakable thudding of a flat tire. I pulled over as best I could, though pulled over suggests there was an actual shoulder. In reality, I just edged my Honda as far to the side as possible without sliding into the ditch. I sat there for a few minutes, hoping the rain would ease up, but it only intensified. Thunder boomed overhead, and lightning flashed so bright it left spots in my vision. When I tried to call for roadside assistance, my phone showed no service. Of course, I checked the time, 7:48 p.m., and realized darkness was setting in fast. The thought of changing a tire in this weather, on this narrow road, in the growing darkness made my stomach knot up. I'd have to wait it out or find help. That's when I noticed a faint light through the trees, maybe a quarter-mile off the road. A house. Someone who could help, or at least let me use their phone. I grabbed my purse, phone, and keys, pulled my jacket over my head, and made a run for it. The path to the light wasn't really a path at all, just a slight clearing between trees that quickly turned to mud under my feet. I slipped twice, nearly falling flat on my face the second time. By the time I reached what turned out to be a small cabin, I was soaked to the bone and covered in mud up to my knees. The cabin looked old, but maintained. A single dim light glowed from what I assumed was the front window. I hesitated before knocking. Something about the place felt off. It was so isolated, and there were no vehicles parked outside. But the thunder crashed again, closer this time, and I quickly rapped on the door. No answer. I knocked again, louder, still nothing. Testing the handle, I was surprised when it turned easily. "Hello?" I called out, pushing the door open slightly. "I'm sorry to barge in, but my car broke down. I just need to use a phone." The cabin was silent except for the sound of rain hammering on the roof. I opened the door wider and stepped inside. The interior was sparse, a small living area with a worn couch and a wood stove that wasn't lit. The single light I'd seen came from an old lamp on a side table. The air smelled musty, but not unpleasant, like old books and wood. It was warm, though, and dry, a massive improvement over the storm outside. "Hello, is anyone home?" My voice sounded small in the quiet cabin. A quick glance showed a tiny kitchenette in one corner, a closed door that I assumed led to a bathroom, and another door that was partially open, revealing what looked like a bedroom. No phones visible, no people either. I was about to check the bedroom for a landline when I heard a noise, a soft thud like something heavy being set down, coming from behind that partially open door. My heart jumped. "Hello? I'm sorry to intrude. I just need some help." Silence. I took a step toward the bedroom door, then stopped. The rational part of my brain was screaming at me to leave, to get back to my car and take my chances with the storm. But another part, the part that was cold and wet and scared, kept me rooted in place. "I'm coming in, okay? I just need to use your phone," I called out, trying to sound braver than I felt. As I approached the door, it slowly swung open wider. I still remember the absolute terror that washed over me when I saw him. A man, tall and gaunt, with wild matted hair and several days' worth of beard, stood in the doorway. His clothes, what looked like a gray uniform of some kind, were torn and dirty. But it was his eyes that made my blood run cold. They were dark and intense, darting around like he couldn't focus on any one thing. And in his right hand was a knife. Not a kitchen knife, but something more like a hunting knife with a serrated edge. I gasped and stumbled backward, nearly falling over a small table. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice hoarse. "Why are you here?" "I'm sorry," I stammered. "My car broke down. The storm. I just needed a phone. I'll go." "No." The word was sharp, definitive. "You're not going anywhere." He stepped fully into the room now, and I could see a strange bulge beneath his sleeve, something wrapped around his wrist. A bandage? No. As he moved, I caught a glimpse of metal, a handcuff with the chain broken. Oh God. Please, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I won't tell anyone I saw you. I'll just go back to my car. He laughed, a harsh, broken sound. In this storm, no one's that stupid. You'd call the cops the second you got service. He gestured with the knife toward the couch. Sit down. I sat, my legs suddenly too weak to hold me up anyway. My mind was racing, trying to piece together who this man was. The uniform, the handcuff, an escaped prisoner. My stomach lurched at the realization. You're staying here until the storm passes, he said, pacing now. Then we'll see. Those were the longest hours of my life. The cabin had no clock, but it felt like an eternity as I sat rigid on that couch, watching him pace back and forth, knife always in hand. He kept glancing out the window, flinching at every thunder crash. The rain showed no signs of letting up. Occasionally, he'd mutter to himself, words I couldn't make out. Sometimes he'd stop and stare at me, like he was trying to decide what to do with me. I tried to make myself small, uninteresting, unthreatening. Are you hungry? He asked suddenly, after what must have been at least 2 hours. The question caught me off guard. No, I lied, even though I hadn't eaten since lunch. He nodded and resumed his pacing. Storm's not letting up, he muttered. Not good, not good. His agitation was growing. He'd pace faster, then stop abruptly and listen, as if he could hear something beyond the rain and thunder. His knuckles were white around the knife handle. They'll be looking for me, he said suddenly, not really to me. Probably have dogs. Dogs can't track in rain this heavy, though. I said nothing, afraid any response would set him off. You know who I am? He asked, suddenly focusing on me with those unnerving eyes. I shook my head. Good, he said. Better that way. Another hour passed. My clothes were starting to dry, making me uncomfortably clammy. I needed to use the bathroom, but was terrified to ask. The man's pacing had become more erratic, his muttering more frequent. I need to check something, he said abruptly, moving toward the front door. He cracked it open and peered out into the darkness, the knife still clutched in his hand. This was my chance, maybe my only one. With his back to me, I scanned the room for anything I could use as a weapon. My eyes landed on a piece of firewood next to the wood stove, a thick, solid log about the size of my forearm. Moving as silently as possible, I stood an inch toward it. The floor creaked beneath my foot, and I froze. He didn't turn. He was too focused on whatever he thought he might see outside. I reached the woodpile and wrapped my fingers around the log, lifting it carefully. It was heavier than I expected, solid oak or maple. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he must hear it over the rain. When he finally closed the door and turned back, I was still standing by the wood stove, the log hidden behind my back. His eyes narrowed. What are you doing? I told you to sit. I just needed to stretch my legs, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. And I need to use the bathroom. He seemed to consider this, then nodded toward the closed door I'd noticed earlier. Make it quick. I hesitated, unsure what to do with my makeshift weapon. I couldn't take it with me. He'd see. But leaving it meant starting from scratch when I came out. Now, he snapped, impatient. I reluctantly set the log down as naturally as possible and walked to the bathroom, feeling his eyes on my back the whole way. The bathroom was tiny and windowless, no escape route there. I used the toilet quickly, then splashed water on my face, trying to clear my head and calm my racing heart. Think. When I emerged, He was standing by the window again, staring out at the storm. The log was still where I'd left it. I moved back toward the couch, but instead of sitting, I quietly picked up the log again. He must have sensed something, because he started to turn. I didn't hesitate. Couldn't hesitate. I lunged forward and swung the log with every ounce of strength I had, aiming for his head. I've never been athletic. In school, I was always picked last for teams, but in that moment, fear and adrenaline made me stronger than I'd ever been. The log connected with the side of his head with a sickening thud. He dropped like a stone, the knife clattering to the floor beside him. For a moment, I just stood there, the log still clutched in my shaking hands, certain he would get up. But he remained motionless, a small trickle of blood forming at his temple. Oh God, had I killed him? I forced myself to kneel beside him, my fingers trembling as I felt for a pulse in his neck. It was there, strong and steady. He was just unconscious. I don't remember making the decision to take the knife. My body just acted on instinct, grabbing it from the floor and backing away from his still form. I needed to get out, get help before he woke up. Outside, the rain was still coming down in sheets. I had no idea which direction led back to the road, but I couldn't stay in that cabin a moment longer. I plunged into the darkness, the knife clutched in my right hand like a talisman. The ground had turned to pure mud, sucking at my shoes with every step. Twice I fell to my knees, the knife nearly slipping from my grip the second time. I was soaked through again within seconds, the cold rain plastering my hair to my face and neck. I had no idea where I was going. Every tree looked the same in the darkness, illuminated only by occasional flashes of lightning. I picked what I hoped was the direction of the road and pushed forward, branches whipping at my face and arms as I stumbled through the underbrush. The sound of rushing water stopped me cold. A stream that had probably been a gentle trickle earlier in the day was now a raging torrent, at least 10 feet across. I couldn't see how deep it was, but the water was moving fast enough to sweep me away if I fell. I followed the stream, hoping it would lead to a narrower point or some way across. The ground grew steeper, more treacherous. My shoes, not made for hiking, offered no traction on the slick mud. That's when I heard it. A shout, distant but unmistakable, coming from the direction of the cabin. He was awake. Pure panic surged through me. I abandoned all caution and ran, slipping and sliding down the muddy slope, branches tearing at my clothes and skin. I couldn't tell if he was following. The rain drowned out any sounds of pursuit. But I wasn't taking chances. After what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, I saw lights through the trees, headlights from a passing car. The road. I scrambled up a steep embankment, knife still in hand, and practically fell onto the asphalt. A car swerved to avoid me, horn blaring, then screeched to a halt about 50 yards ahead. An older man rolled down his window, staring at me with a mixture of concern and fear. I must have been a sight, soaked, covered in mud, wild-eyed, clutching a knife. "Help me," I gasped. "Please, police." To his credit, he didn't drive away. He let me into his car, though he eyed the knife nervously until I set it on the floor. He had a cell phone, a beautiful, wonderful cell phone with actual service. I called 911 with shaking fingers. The police found the cabin using my garbled directions. They found him too, still there, semi-conscious and disoriented. It turned out he was an escaped convict who'd broken out of a prison transport when it crashed 2 days earlier during another storm. He'd been serving time for armed robbery and attempted murder. The officer who took my statement said they'd been searching for him but had no idea he was hiding in that cabin. They told me I was lucky. If I hadn't hit him when I did, if I hadn't escaped when I did, They left the rest unsaid. Physically, I was mostly fine. Some cuts and bruises, mild hypothermia, a sprained ankle I hadn't even noticed in my panic. But other wounds don't show on the outside. Now, 3 months later, I still can't sleep when it rains. I keep reliving those moments in the cabin, wondering what would have happened if I hadn't found that log, if I hadn't hit him hard enough, if he had caught me in the woods. My therapist says it will get better with time. Maybe she's right. But for now, I keep a baseball bat beside my bed, and I check the weather forecast obsessively. And whenever dark clouds gather on the horizon, I make sure I'm safely home, doors locked, car in good working order. Because I learned something that night. Sometimes the shelter you seek is more dangerous than the storm you're running from. I can't believe I'm finally writing this all down. My hands are still shaking a bit, even though it's been 3 months since it happened. I guess the therapist was right. Putting it into words might help me process everything. I've been reading other people's accounts of strange experiences here, and figured maybe sharing mine might help someone else too, or at least serve as a warning. It was supposed to be a simple weekend trip to visit my cousin in Tennessee. I'd made the drive through the Appalachians before, but never during storm season. The forecast mentioned rain, but nothing prepared me for the absolute deluge that hit as I was winding through those mountain roads. I'd been driving for about 6 hours when the storm really intensified. The rain was coming down so hard that even with my wipers at full speed, I could barely see 10 feet ahead. The road had turned into a series of puddles and small streams. My GPS had lost signal about 30 minutes earlier, but I figured I just needed to keep following the main road downhill, and I'd eventually hit the highway again. Then my car started making this awful grinding noise. I'm not mechanically inclined, but even I knew something was seriously wrong. The engine light flashed on, followed by several other warning indicators, and within seconds my car just died, right on a steep incline with no shoulder to pull onto. I tried restarting it a few times, but nothing. When I checked my phone, no service, not even a single bar. I sat there for maybe 20 minutes, hoping the rain would let up or another car would pass, but neither happened. The road was completely deserted. With darkness coming and the temperature dropping, I knew I couldn't stay in the car overnight. According to my last GPS reading, the nearest town was still about 12 miles away. So I grabbed my backpack, stuffed it with essentials, phone, wallet, power bank, flashlight, the half-empty water bottle I had, and a granola bar. I put on my rain jacket for all the good it did, and started walking. The rain was relentless. Within minutes, I was soaked through, my shoes squelching with every step. The wind whipped between the trees, making this eerie howling sound that kept making me look over my shoulder. The worst part was the darkness. It was only around 6 p.m., but with the storm clouds overhead, it might as well have been midnight. My flashlight beams seemed pathetically small against the vast darkness of the mountains. After walking for what felt like hours but was probably only 45 minutes, I was shivering uncontrollably. My jeans were plastered to my legs and my fingers had gone numb. That's when I saw it, a faint yellowish light through the trees a little way up a side path. A cabin. I can't describe the relief I felt in that moment. I practically ran up the muddy path, slipping twice and covering myself in more mud. As I got closer, I could see it was a decent-sized log cabin with a covered porch. Smoke was coming from the chimney, which meant someone was definitely home. I hesitated for just a second before knocking. I'm not usually one to bother strangers, but hypothermia seemed like the worst option. When the door opened, I was face to face with an older man, probably in his late 60s. He had this weathered face with deep lines around his eyes, gray hair, and was wearing flannel pajama pants with a faded blue sweater. "Good Lord, son, you're drenched," he exclaimed, his accent thick with Appalachian twang. "Margaret," he called over his shoulder, "we got ourselves a visitor about to catch his death out here." He introduced himself as Tom and practically pulled me inside. The warmth hit me immediately. They had a wood stove going in the corner of what looked like a cozy living room with worn furniture and handmade quilts. Margaret appeared from what I assumed was the kitchen. She was shorter than Tom, with silver hair pulled back in a bun, and wore a floral apron over her clothes. She immediately started fussing over me. "You poor thing. Tom, get him a towel. Where's your car, honey? How'd you end up out in this mess?" I explained about my breakdown and the lack of cell service, while Tom handed me a towel and Margaret disappeared again, returning with a steaming mug of tea. "No cell service for miles round here," Tom said, nodding. "And in this weather, ain't nobody gonna be out on those roads. You're lucky you found us." Margaret agreed. "You'll stay the night, of course. Can't send you back out in that. I'll make up the guest room." I was so grateful I almost cried. They insisted I get out of my wet clothes, and Tom lent me some of his, sweatpants that were too short and a flannel shirt that was too wide, but they were dry and warm. Margaret took my soaked clothes and said she'd put them in their dryer. After changing, I joined them in the kitchen where Margaret had heated up some homemade stew. It was delicious, and as I ate, they told me they'd lived in that cabin for over 40 years, mostly keeping to themselves. They didn't go into town much anymore, they said, preferring the quiet of the mountains. It was during dinner that I noticed the first odd thing. When Margaret got up to get more bread from the counter, Tom gave her this. "Look." I can't explain it exactly. It wasn't affectionate or anything normal like that. It was more like they were communicating something silently, and whatever it was made Margaret's smile tighten a little at the corners. I brushed it off. They were being incredibly kind, and I figured older couples develop their own way of communicating after decades together. But then I heard something. While Tom was telling me about the weather patterns in the area, I distinctly heard a thump from somewhere below us, like something heavy had fallen. Both Tom and Margaret froze for just a split second. Tom cleared his throat and continued his weather story a little louder, while Margaret suddenly stood and said, "I should check on your clothes." She hurried out of the kitchen. I told myself it was just the house settling, or maybe something in the basement shifting because of the storm. Old cabins make noises, right? But then I heard it again, and this time I could have sworn it was followed by what sounded like a muffled cry. Tom must have seen something in my expression because he quickly said, "Old pipes, make all sorts of racket during storms. More stew?" I accepted the second helping, but my appetite was gone. As I ate slowly, I noticed more things. The windows all had heavy drapes pulled across them, even though it was dark outside and no one could see in. There were multiple locks on the front door, not just a deadbolt, but 3 separate locks that required keys. And when I glanced into the living room, I saw what looked like a security monitor tucked in the corner, showing grainy images of the outside of the cabin. That seemed excessive for an elderly couple living in such a remote location. After dinner, Tom suggested we play cards to pass the time. The storm was still raging outside, occasionally causing the lights to flicker. Margaret had disappeared somewhere in the house. As we played, Tom kept up a steady stream of conversation, asking me questions about my life, where I lived, if I had family nearby, who was expecting me and when, if anyone knew where I was right now. I answered honestly at first, then started to feel uncomfortable with the direction of his questions. I made up a lie about my cousin expecting me tonight, and that he would be worried when I didn't show up. Tom's expression didn't change, but his eyes seemed to harden slightly. "Well, we'll get you on your way first thing tomorrow. Roads should be clear by then," he said, his tone unchanged but something different in his manner. I nodded, fighting to keep my expression neutral while my instincts were starting to scream at me. Something was wrong here. Very wrong. Around 10 p.m., Margaret returned and said the guest room was ready. She led me upstairs to a small bedroom with a single bed, a nightstand, and not much else. The window had the same heavy drapes as downstairs. There was no lock on the inside of the door, I noticed. "Bathroom's down the hall if you need it," she said, her voice friendly, but her eyes not quite meeting mine. "Sleep tight." I thanked her, and she left, closing the door behind her. I stood there in the silence, listening to her footsteps fade away. Then I heard low voices downstairs, Tom and Margaret talking in hushed tones I couldn't make out. I sat on the edge of the bed, heart pounding. I was being paranoid, right? These people had taken me in during a storm, fed me, given me dry clothes. But those noises from below, those looks, the questions, the multiple locks. I couldn't sleep. I lay in the dark, fully dressed, including shoes, listening to the house. Around midnight, I heard Tom and Margaret go to their bedroom down the hall. I waited another hour, listening to the storm gradually lessening outside and the occasional creak of the house. Then I heard it again, a thump, followed by what was definitely a sob, quickly muffled. It was coming from below. I had to know. I opened my door as quietly as possible and crept downstairs, avoiding the spots that had creaked when we'd walked on them earlier. The main floor was dark except for a small nightlight in the kitchen. I looked around, trying to figure out where the basement entrance might be. I found it off the kitchen, a door that I hadn't noticed during dinner because it blended so well with the paneling. It had a padlock on it, but the lock wasn't fully closed. Someone had been down there recently and hadn't secured it properly. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely remove the lock without making noise. I eased the door open, wincing at the slight creak. A set of wooden stairs disappeared into darkness below. I used the flashlight on my phone, keeping the brightness as low as possible while still being able to see. The basement was larger than I expected, with rough stone walls and a dirt floor in some areas. There were shelves with canned goods and supplies, tools hanging on walls, normal basement stuff. But at the far end, partially hidden behind some storage shelves, was another area. I moved closer, my heart in my throat. And that's when I saw her. A young woman, maybe early 20s, was chained to the wall. She was dressed in filthy clothes, her hair matted, her face gaunt with dark circles under her eyes. When my light hit her face, her eyes widened in terror, then something like desperate hope. She tried to speak, but her voice was just a raspy whisper. I could see dried blood on her wrists where the shackles had cut into her skin. I felt like I was going to throw up. I rushed over to her, whispering that I was going to help. She kept looking past me, trying to warn me with her eyes. I turned just in time to see Tom standing at the bottom of the stairs, a shotgun in his hands. Margaret was behind him, holding what looked like rope. "Well now," Tom said, his friendly demeanor completely gone. "Looks like our guest is the curious type, Margaret." "They always are, Tom," she replied, her voice flat. "I told you we should have locked his door from the outside." As they approached, Tom kept the shotgun pointed at me, while explaining in the same conversational tone he'd used during our card game that I shouldn't have gone exploring, that most folks know better than to poke around other people's homes. that now I'd complicated things. Margaret seemed almost bored as she told me they'd been taking in stranded travelers for years. Some we let go, she said, if they've got too many people expecting them, too risky. Others like her, she nodded toward the chained woman. Nobody misses, just like nobody's going to miss you. I was forced at gunpoint to sit in a wooden chair where Margaret tied my hands behind my back and my ankles to the chair legs. The rope bit into my skin, but I noticed she wasn't very good at knots. There was some give there. They left us in the dark, Tom saying they'd deal with me properly in the morning after they'd had some sleep. I heard the padlock click this time. The moment they were gone, I started working on the ropes. The back of the chair had a jagged edge where the wood had split, and I worked my bindings against it, back and forth. It was agonizingly slow, and the rope kept rubbing my wrists raw. I could feel blood making my hands slippery, which actually helped a little. The woman watched me, occasionally whispering encouragement. Her name was Layla. She'd been hitchhiking 3 weeks ago when Tom and Margaret picked her up during another storm. There had been others before her, she said. Some were sold off to people Tom knew. Others just disappeared. She'd been kept alive because someone was coming to look at her next week. It took nearly 2 hours, but I finally got my hands free, then worked on my ankles. My wrists were bleeding pretty badly, but adrenaline kept me from feeling much pain. I found a rusty screwdriver on one of the workbenches and managed to pick the lock on Layla's chains after what felt like forever. She was weak from being underfed and restrained for so long, so I had to half carry her up the stairs. We moved as silently as possible, freezing at every creak of the old wooden steps. We had just reached the main floor when headlights swept across the front windows. A car was pulling up outside. Tom and Margaret must have heard it too. Their bedroom door opened upstairs and I heard Tom curse. We were trapped, Tom and Margaret coming from upstairs, and whoever was outside blocking the front. There was a knock at the door, followed by a voice calling out, "Sheriff's Department? Anyone home?" I've never moved so fast in my life. I practically lunged for the front door, fumbling with those multiple locks while Layla collapsed against the wall, too weak to stand on her own anymore. I got the door open just as Tom reached the bottom of the stairs, shotgun in hand. The officer outside, Deputy Harris, according to his nameplate, looked startled to see me. His hand automatically went to his gun when he saw the state I was in. Borrowed clothes, bloody wrists, wild-eyed. "Someone called about an abandoned vehicle," he started, then saw Layla and Tom with the shotgun. Everything happened very quickly after that. Deputy Harris drew his weapon, ordering Tom to drop the shotgun. Margaret appeared at the top of the stairs, holding something I couldn't see. The deputy called for backup on his radio, his gun never wavering from Tom. I pulled Layla fully behind me, trying to shield her with my body. Tom eventually lowered his weapon, his eyes cold but calculating. I could see him weighing his options. Margaret remained frozen on the stairs. It took about 20 minutes for backup to arrive, 2 more sheriff's cars and an ambulance. By then, the deputy had both Tom and Margaret handcuffed and sitting on their couch. When the other officers searched the house, what they found in that basement and in a hidden room upstairs was apparently much worse than what I'd seen. Layla and I were taken to the hospital in separate ambulances. My injuries were relatively minor: rope burns, minor lacerations, dehydration, and shock. Layla had been through much worse, but they said she would recover physically. In the following days, I learned more about Tom and Margaret Wilkins. They'd lived in that cabin for decades, appearing to be a normal, if reclusive, elderly couple. But they had been kidnapping vulnerable travelers for at least 15 years. Some victims were kept as prisoners, others sold into human trafficking networks. They targeted people who wouldn't be missed or whose disappearances would be hard to trace. If I hadn't happened to break down during that storm, if that deputy hadn't been sent to check on my abandoned car, if I hadn't investigated those sounds, how many more people would have vanished into that cabin? I still can't drive through remote areas alone. I still wake up in the middle of the night thinking I hear those muffled cries. I still remember Tom's eyes, how they changed from friendly to empty in an instant when he found me in that basement. The therapist says the nightmares will fade eventually, but what doesn't fade is the knowledge that sometimes the most dangerous predators are the ones who offer you shelter from the storm.